In many rural areas of the American West, cutting firewood in national forests is a necessary chore if you want to warm a house through the winter. Our home in mountainous central Idaho was no exception. It was normal for my dad to pick me up and my brothers up after school and head into the mountains for an afternoon of firewood gathering. My dad would fell the dead trees, then saw them into chunks. My brothers and I had the task of rolling the wood to the truck and loading it. We would continue this assembly line process until we had a truckload of wood, usually before nightfall. Hot, sweaty, and exhausted, we would pile into the truck cab and make our way down the mountain. At home the next day, we would unload and split the wood and stack it into neat little rows. The process was repeated until we had a winter's worth of fuel for our house, our grandma's cabin, and any extra for elderly neighbors. Now, this particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the other side of the valley. This was well outside of our familiar logging area. No real reason for the change, but my dad said that he wanted a change of scenery. This logging road had not been maintained in some time. Large rocks and fallen branches littered the path. My brothers and I had to walk out in front, pushing rocks and wood out of the way as my dad lurched to the truck up the switchbacks. Yard by yard, we slowly made our way up the mountain. That hike was physically brutal, I remember that much. And as we ascended the mountain and got farther into the trees, this odd feeling started to set in. I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from the hike or something else, but there was a sort of electricity in the air, like the whole mountain was buzzing at a wavelength just below my senses. In some odd way, it felt like the mountain knew that we were there, and it wasn't welcomed to that fact. I wanted to say something to my brothers, but before I opened my mouth, my younger brother said, "Does anyone else feel like we're all not welcome here?" My older brother and I stopped in our tracks and looked back at him. Both of us nodded in agreement. This moment was broken by my dad honking and motioning us to continue clearing the path. So reluctantly, we pushed forward to a small clearing in the woods where we finally stopped the truck. My dad, oblivious to our apprehension, or simply choosing to ignore it, grabbed his saw and went to work. As the wood was felled and loaded, I couldn't shake this ominous feeling enveloping me like a dark shroud. I noticed my brothers were taking occasional glances over their shoulders as we worked too. Everyone but my dad, it seemed, was on edge. The sun nestled down into the trees and twilight began to set in. As the light drained from the sky, my anxiety only intensified. It wasn't until my dad unexpectedly told us to load up that a wave of relief finally flooded over me. I could see the tension in my brothers melt away as well. The truck wasn't fully loaded, mind you, which was an oddity, but getting a half load was a waste according to my dad. We would sometimes work into the dark just to make sure the truck was full, but tonight he seemed eager to head home for some reason. With everything loaded, we started down the road, and although dead tired, everyone seemed to be in a much lighter mood now. We were chatting and cracking jokes while trying to blow off some steam from the afternoon. We were almost out of the tree line and into the valley desert. Going down the switchbacks, you want to be careful, especially with a load on the back, even if it was half that, when a brown blur jumped up from down the slope side of the switchback. My father swore, and that was the only word that came out of my dad's mouth as he slammed on the brakes. Loaded with wood and traveling downhill, there was no way to avoid smashing into the blur. The truck finally ground to a standstill. The four of us peered through the windshield, nobody saying a word. Illuminated in the yellow glow of our headlights was a crumpled body of a deer. Grumbling and cursing the deer's existence, my dad exited the truck to investigate. Doing as they were told, my brother stayed put in the truck. I didn't listen, following close behind my dad. The truck was fine. We hadn't been traveling fast when we smacked the deer. Just some hair and blood on the grill guard. Hitting a deer really wasn't that unusual, to be honest. The mountains were full of them, after all. But what was unusual was that the deer dropped so quickly. At faster speeds, deer could still be upright and sprint away to die in the woods after a collision. That sort of last burst of an adrenaline dump. This one, though, just fell over like a rag doll. Before even approaching the carcass, though, a deep, foul smell hit us. Deer smell bad when they're alive, but this was on a whole nother level. It was the smell of decay and rot. My stomach began to turn as we got closer. My nostrils were burning as well. And coming up on the deer, it was clearly dead. Like, really, really dead. The stench was so overwhelming that my eyes started watering, in fact. The body was a true horror scene. The deer's eyes were gone, replaced with sunken, hollow holes. As if to overcompensate for their absence, the tongue was swollen and black as coal. It could not be contained, and it was hanging out of the side of its mouth. The underbelly was split open as well. Entrails and offal spilled onto the dirt. In the dim headlights, it sort of looked as though the deer's fur was moving, wiggling almost. Holding my breath, I bent down for a closer look, and my heart stopped. The deer, inside and out, was covered in maggots. It was dead all right, but our truck obviously didn't kill it. Clearly, it had been dead for days, if not weeks. I backed away retching. That electric anxiety came screaming back all of a sudden, too. My dad was always the quiet, stoic type, but right now, even in the dim headlights of the truck, I could see the abject horror in his face. His gaze was no longer on the deer, but focused down the mountain. Poorly masking the fear in his voice, he told me firmly to walk back to the truck and get inside. I obeyed without objection, of course, and as I grabbed the door handle, a loud shriek came out of the trees. Branches were shattering and breaking as something was heading down the slope towards us. I slammed my door closed as my dad reached the truck. Before his door was shut, he pressed on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, sending us over the deer carcass and racing down the hill. With mine and my brothers yelling, it was hard to tell if the shrieking was following us, but our truck popped out of the tree line and into the desert sagebrush. Once out of the woods, everything began to quieten down. We were left with only the rumble of the engine and the wind through the half-open windows. Pulling into our property, the truck came to a stop, and we all just sat there in silence for a moment. No one moved to leave the truck, and everyone started talking at once. We all had questions, like what was the screaming? How does a dead deer jump uphill in front of a truck like that? There was no way the truck killed it. Dad, he just shook his head and motioned for us to quieten down. That deer was dead when we hit it. It didn't jump out in front of us. It was thrown at us. We stared at him. He explained that all day up on the mountain, he too had felt uneasy. Not wanting to worry us boys, he apparently kept it to himself. He described it like walking into a stranger's living room while they're upstairs asleep. That feeling never left him, and as twilight came, he actually happened to catch a shadow in the corner of his eye, not far into the woods, and saw figures moving from tree to tree. He couldn't focus on them long enough for a good look before they dodged behind trees, but at that, his stomach dropped. Working hard to keep his composure, he hurried us to the truck to leave. It was after hitting the deer and discovering that it was long dead that my dad pieced together what was happening. Something threw that deer to get us to stop. Before the shrieking began, he could hear something moving in the darkness beyond the road, which meant that the whole thing was a trap. Running back to the truck, it could have started an ambush or triggered a prey drive, so we walked back to the truck instead. The second that we were inside, he drove that truck down the hill with no intention of stopping for anyone or anything. That feeling of electricity also didn't disappear until we hit the county highway. My brothers and I never saw anything as we drove away, but those screams from the forest, they will never leave my mind. We didn't gather firewood the rest of the season after that. For the first time in his life, my dad actually just bought what we needed. and although we started to gather wood again the next season, we've never been back up that particular mountain, ever. The Forest Service has permanently closed and reclaimed that road, in fact. The only way back up into those woods is a long hike, one that I'm definitely not interested in ever taking again. Whatever was on that mountain, whatever threw that deer carcass, whatever chased us out of the woods that day, it didn't want us there. It wanted us gone. Or maybe worse. Maybe it wanted us dead. As a young child, or a young teen, I lived in a very strange situation in the woods. I'm not sure if this encounter may have been some kind of entity or perhaps something different, but I do hope that someone can give me more information, at least, about what happened to me and my friend. So I, female, was around 12 years old at the time, and one of my best friends, Alex, must have been about 10. Alex's father had purchased a large amount of forested land around maybe 100 kilometers away from the city that we lived in, Montreal, Canada. It was all forest when Alex's family acquired it. They cleared a little patch to build a house, and the rest was pure, unadulterated forest. Their land was cut in two by a dirt road that, if you followed it for several kilometers, led to a few houses, and their land was very different depending on which side of the dirt road that you looked. On the right side, where their house was, the forest was light and luminous, or at least it felt that way. It wasn't too dense, with little rolling hills and a lovely place to play. On the left side of the road, however, it was another story. First, there was a deep ditch, maybe 2 meters deep, which then became quite high in a steep hill. Weirdly enough as well, all along the long road, the ditch was full of car parts. A set of car wheels here, a door there, a steering wheel way over there, all old and overgrown with moss. And over the steep hill, the forest gave off a really bad vibe. It had lots of very tall, dark trees with almost black trunks, and the place seemed somehow devoid of light or life. Climbing the hill, which we seldom were willing to do because of the creeps that it gave us, there was some part of swamp there as well. When we were there was this sort of strange pressure as well. We sensed a kind of animal instinct that told us to leave the place, I guess, but the strange atmosphere was spontaneously obvious to me and Alex, and we playfully called that side of the road the Demon's Forest. Now, one weekend, probably in 2001 or 2002, my family and I came to visit Alex's family. Bored by the adults, my friend and I decided to go and play in the forest. Alex's father told us to watch out. There was an animal that had been rummaging in their trash bin and causing other nuisances, apparently. He said that it was a dog that looked somewhat like a Rottweiler, that surely belonged to somebody living up the dirt road. He warned us, though, that we shouldn't interact with the dog if we saw it, as it didn't look healthy as far as he could tell, or there was something weird about it. He said that it somehow looked diseased or contagious, or had patches of fur missing. I can't remember exactly, but it was something like that. In any case, we set out on our walk eventually. It was autumn and the leaves were pretty and golden, many having already fallen to the ground. It was a calm, slightly overcast, windless day. The air was really still and calm that day, and Alex and I decided to walk along the dirt road, with the pleasant section of the forest to our right and Demon's Forest to our left. We chatted while following the road as it was rising up a slope, and as usual, we were slightly creeped out going up the road because of the weird vibes of the forest to the left side, but we were challenging ourselves to be brave and trying not to really think about how unsettling it felt. Now, a good distance away from their home, when it was already well out of sight, I noticed the first strange thing of the day. Out of the steep hill on the left side of the road, there was a very large and dark pine tree hanging over the road. Somebody had attached a pink ribbon to one of the branches, which was already a bit strange, since this was territory of Alex's family, and they had no daughters or other little girls likely hanging around, or other people who may be owners of pink ribbons who were likely to hang out in this deserted road anyway. The strange thing, though, was that the ribbon was flailing strongly in the wind. Its loose ends were flapping almost horizontally, but it was a completely windless day. There was no wind to speak of. The ribbon was within my reach, so I touched it as it was flailing. I even flicked my finger and held it in the air to check if I could feel any wind or current or anything, as my dad had taught me. But the air was perfectly still. I mentioned it to my friend. He seemed distracted and was younger than me, and sometimes didn't catch on to what I said, so I didn't press the matter. We continued our climb, and eventually we reached a place where the hill on the left side of the road had a sort of gentler slope and began further away from the road. In fact, it looked as if the hill was kind of carved out in a way that would have made it easy for us to climb to get into Demon's Forest. It almost seemed as if the hill was carved into a sloping sort of half circle, like in a theatre, I guess, and the road that we stood on would have been the stage. It gave us a very clear, treeless view of the hillside, though, full of golden and red fallen leaves. The trees began at the top of the hill, maybe 9 meters away. We stopped to admire the view. Canadian autumn's a sight to behold, let me tell you. When Alex suddenly got really excited. He thought that he heard something in the Demon's Woods, up the hill, and he really wanted to pay attention. He explained that there are wild cats in that forest, that they had spotted them with his dad apparently, and one of them had reportedly had kittens. Kittens being one of the most exciting things in the world for kids our age, getting us riled up a bit. But somehow, and for some reason, my hackles were up and I couldn't really relax, even thinking about the adorable wild kittens. He actually thought that he had heard the cat meow in the forest, up the hill close by. I heard nothing of the sort and thought that he was inventing it. But he suggested that we try meowing at it to see if it would respond. Maybe it would even bring its kittens along and we could see them and play with them, he said. I hadn't heard any sounds at all and didn't really like this idea of screaming meows into the creepy forest. I mean, what kind of wild cat would respond to human children anyway? Wouldn't it be obvious that we were not cats by the sound of us? It seemed like a dumb idea to me, but hey, I was a little bit older. But before I could try to talk him out of it, he loudly meowed into the forest. And to my utter shock, the forest meowed back. Alex was delighted, so he meowed again. Something in the forest answered again. I was actually shocked. This just didn't make any sense to me, and it creeped me out. But I suspended my disbelief to see what would happen. He kept meowing over and over, and for every one of his meows, there was one coming back in response from the woods. Something immediately felt off to me. Feral or wild animals didn't behave that way, and even at 12 years old I realized that. And it wasn't an echo either. The cat did not bounce back any sound that we threw at it, except meows, which reciprocated immediately, and anyway, there were no hard rocky surfaces around of which sound could bounce off like that. Everything was covered in a soft layer of sound-dulling leaves, if anything. Alex, though, seemed to get even more excited. "Listen, the cat is coming towards us. She's coming to see us with her kittens." To my surprise, he was right, too. There was a rustle of dead leaves coming from above us, from above the slope in the creepy forest. It seemed like the rustling was getting closer to us as well. But it was way off because cats are small and light and careful with their steps, right? They don't make a ruckus when they walk through the woods. But here, the rustling leaves sounded extremely obvious, along with the meowing. In fact, it sounded more like, I don't know, steps. Like someone with 2 legs walking in the leaves. And it was getting closer to us. My alarm signals were starting to go off at this point with the wrongness of it all, while my younger friend was completely oblivious. He was calling it more vehemently, noticing that it was coming towards us. Then I realized what seemed so wrong. The sound was coming toward us, but there was nothing to be seen there. What I mean is that right in front of us, we had the gently sloping hill, treeless and clearly visible. Anything coming from the forest, we should have been able to plainly see it. But there was nothing. No source for the rustling sound, nothing moving, but we could clearly hear the meowing. My friend then said, "Oh, her kittens are joining her. Listen, there are more sounds. They're coming to play with us." And he was right. The walking sounds seemed to have multiplied now, and they were coming from various directions all at once. They were getting closer, but as I spun around to look around us, there was nothing visible. Something was way off, and I wanted to leave at this point, but Alex was getting mad at me. The kittens were almost here, and he wanted to see them, so he insisted. At this point, it was extremely tense, and my fight or flight was activating from the wrongness of it all. We were alone and quite exposed on this theater stage to whatever was getting closer to us, which was, more and more obviously with every moment, decidedly not kittens. I was on the verge to force him to go and run home, and then suddenly I heard a very loud panting sound right at my feet. During the first millisecond, I got only mildly surprised because we had a huge husky at home. I was used to it panting next to my feet, I guess, but then a sense of profound dread just dawned on me as I realized that obviously my dog was not there, and it must have been another dog, a very big one by the sound of it, right at my feet. I panicked, looked down, ready to jump away from the dog that somehow got extremely close to me, almost on me in fact, without my noticing. Only there was absolutely nothing at my feet, but I could still hear the loud, breathy panting sound coming from there. I whirl around, all 360 degrees, screaming. Where is it coming from? There's nothing at my feet or anywhere around me. There's nothing here. Yet the sound clearly was there. As I whirl about in a frenzy, I look up the dirt road that we were following, and maybe around 100 meters away, at the top of the slope, I see a lone dog just standing there. And it looks somewhat like a Rottweiler, but very, very bad in shape, extremely unkempt, with patches of fur missing, shaggy and dirty as heck, with some skin exposed where the fur is missing. It looks down at us too, and obviously there's no way that I could hear it panting at that distance, but it almost seemed as though the source of the sound that it was making was at my feet somehow. At that point, the flight instinct wins inside of me, and I have never run as desperately and as fast in my whole life. Thank goodness it was downhill. Alex kept pace right beside me, terrified as well now. We did make it home in one piece, but we never did walk in those woods ever again after that. I came to Alex's place several times in my life. I never wanted to walk in the woods again. We had amazing parties at his house as teens. I was often there rather drunk and having a great time, but I always had this very stressful sensation when I went out of his house, especially at night. When I slept over there, I also had this extremely strange experiences where, when I woke up, I sort of sensed as if something was there and was observing me. In my mid-awake state, I even saw something floating near the ceiling one day. I never had the sensation that it was an immediate threat, though whatever it was, it seemed to be observing. I'm not sure that whatever this was related to what happened on the dirt road, but I thought it was worth mentioning. We never did discuss what happened that day after that, but as I researched it for myself, I found out that the land was historically owned, perhaps by a Mohawk. If anybody can help clarify what happened, then I would be thankful, because it is the weirdest thing to date that has ever happened to me. Tonight's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. So, have you ever felt uncertain about where you're going in life? I know I certainly have. Like, just before I went to university, honestly, I just felt so lost, not knowing what I wanted to do or where I wanted to be in the next 5-10 years. All of that pressure and expectation breathing down my neck, it was pretty stressful. And whether you're dealing with decisions around career, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life, so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. I know from personal experience that therapy has a lot of benefits. For instance, finding coping skills and how to set personal boundaries for yourself empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who have experienced trauma in their life, although therapy can certainly help there too. So, if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/scared today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/scared. So this all starts when me and my two buddies, me 19 and them 20 and 17, went to go fish off this bank on the river in the afternoon. The layout is that you drive over the levee before you drop down into a boat ramp or parking area right next to the river. We brought pizza, beer, weed, music, and of course our rods, hoping that we'd just hang out and do some late night fishing. At this point, we're all set up on the bank with our chairs and speaker, having a nice evening, and it's probably been 2 hours, about 9 p.m. now. All three of us were feeling good with some beers in our system, and then we all of a sudden hear two cars with super loud music pull up and everybody gets out. The cars must have had 4 or 5 people in each one because I heard a lot of people talking, but it was all in Spanish, so I couldn't really make anything out. We try to ignore it, but then it gets so loud that we just couldn't enjoy ourselves, so we start packing up our stuff to head back to the car and just chill out while we sober up. While we're gathering our things, we start to hear what sounds like an argument go down. We start to hear lots of glass shattering and people screaming at the top of their lungs. They couldn't see us, but they were basically no more than 20 feet behind our heads. At this point, we're just keeping quiet, and then you start to hear what sounded like somebody getting punched repeatedly, and then a loud splash into the river by the boat ramp, and someone saying, "Nah, leave him," which was the only word spoken in English. We didn't know what we had just heard happen, and we didn't want to stick around to find out. The three of us tracked back up the steep incline to get back to the car, but as soon as we came into their view, they all got back into the 2 cars and quickly sped back over the levee. Except, we spotted one of the cars just sitting on the top of the levee, slowly creeping forward. When we turned our car on, that car then went fully over the levee. We realized that we were the only car left in the parking lot, and it was now pitch black outside. Again, it's around 9:30. We sat there for no more than 30 seconds just trying to process what we had just heard go down. And then we decided that we needed to get out of there completely and park somewhere to sober up all the way. As we're going over the levee, the road goes over it and then down and makes a sort of sharp left there. Right after we take the sharp left, our hearts drop when we see 4 cars lined up completely horizontal across the road, blocking us from getting through. There's orchards on our left and right, so there's really no going around at all. At this point, my buddy just gassed it straight towards their bumpers to try and split in between the cars and get out of there, even if it meant damaging the front end of his car. Just as we do that, one of the 4 cars slightly moved out of the way, creating a gap. We flew right through it and we got the heck out of there, and they were laying on their horn while we passed through. We don't know what their intentions were, but clearly there were 2 cars in the boat ramp area where we were at, and 2 cars on the other side of the levee blocking the road from anybody else coming in. I ended up filing a police report just in case they really did dump a body into the river. It happens all the time here, but I haven't heard anything back. Whatever was going on that night, it was definitely one of the most terrifying experiences that I've ever had. When we were young, my cousins and I had a bush house at the end of the back garden, just before the garden opened up into the heath. Due to me being a full-time wheelchair user from birth, it was Gran's idea that instead of having a tree house that had to be climbed, it would be safer and more practical to have a bush house that all of us kids could use. Even though we protested greatly, as although I'm disabled, I frequently used to climb trees in the local parks and over the heath, with the help of my cousins obviously, but Gran's word was final, and we never argued with her as she was a beautiful and lovely matriarch, but also as tough as an old boot and very scary when pushed. So, with all of that said, we busied ourselves on choosing an appropriate bush for our new play area. On selecting a perfect one, Gran delegated tasks to the older boys to clear the outer area of the bush and also make a little hollow inside of it, with pieces of spare wood on the ground to serve as a basic floor so that my little wheelchair could run safely and easily inside of it. Gran was reasonably young at that time, and while the boys were doing the heavy work, she arranged us younger ones in getting furniture, supplies, and accessories to make our new play space cozy and comfortable for all of us. A year later, our old bush house was in full use. In the daytime, us younger ones played in it after school. On weekends and holidays and in the evenings and nights, it was a place where the older cousins could have some privacy away from, well, the eyes of Gran and Mum and to do whatever they did. Our bush house was cozy though. We got chairs, beanbags, and floor cushions donated by relatives and friends of the family. We also had a small table that we had a tablecloth for, and our Auntie Jay made some pretty curtains that we hung up the best that we could. We even had a cupboard where we kept snacks in, and only when the older boys or Mum were there, we were allowed to use the camping stove to heat tin beans and sausages or pot noodles up and make some tea. Gran's bingo friend, Jean, donated a hand-me-down rug. It was shabby and out of date, but we thought that it was cool. Now, it was slap bang in the middle of the summer holidays, probably early July when this happened. Elle and I were 7 and G was 11. Our older cousin G's brother A was there earlier, but by 3 o'clock had grown tired of hanging around with us and had gone out with his mates. The 3 of them were coming back later to make us all dinner on the stove. Elle and I were sitting at the table, playing Beggar Your Neighbor with a pack of playing cards that we got from the living room cupboard, and G was sitting in the corner of the bush house on a beanbag, reading The Secret Garden, I think, for the 3rd time. In other words, it was just another normal at-home day. Nothing unusual or odd occurred. Till around 4, when we all heard a sound that was at odds with the peaceful scene. It was sort of between a growl and an owl's hoot, and a man mumbling. We were particularly outdoorsy kids, being born and raised in the outskirts of urban London. But being bright little girls, we all knew that owls are nocturnal creatures, and the accompanying sounds that were mixed with the hoots didn't come from the same bird. The weird sounds were joined by a furtive and stealthy rustling coming from the back of the bush house. Actually, it was really near to where G was sitting, and she jumped up, stifling a scream by covering her mouth with her hands. We also saw a dark dog-like shape through the dense foliage of the back of the bush house, which incidentally led straight onto the beginning of the heath, as I said earlier. The strangest thing about this figure was that it was very present, but also rather ethereal, almost as if the figure was attempting to hide intentionally. Also, throughout this period, there were no other natural sounds, no bird sounds, no insect sounds, and no background human noise. Being right in the center of a council estate, you could always hear people talking, cars revving and dogs barking, all the regular noises of urban community living. But at that time, it was as if the entire world had paused, and us 3 were the only ones conscious and present, along with this mysterious figure. We really didn't know what to do, but we gathered together, and both G and L took one handle of my wheelchair and pulled me back out of our bush house, not taking our eyes off of the translucent figure as we went. When we were free from the bush house and close enough to home for us to feel out of danger and safe, we just looked at each other very doubtfully, but I could tell that we were all terrified. G suddenly said, "Stay here. Don't move or speak, okay?" She ran to the garden shed and climbed up the side to the manky rotten roof. I completely lost it at this point, letting out a squeal of utter fear. Quick-witted as usual, though, Elle put her hand over my mouth and hushed me. Elle and I watched while G looked over the hedgerow which divided our back garden from the beginning of the heath. From our position, her face was clearly visible, and G's expression was a mixture of confusion, surprise, and fright, and her pretty brown eyes looked really troubled. We waited for G to come back to us before asking her in earnest what she saw. She didn't answer straight away, but when she did, she said, "It was so strange. I didn't see anything. No dogs, no other animals." She paused, her young mind trying to summon the words to explain what she witnessed. "There was a man. I saw the back of him walking away towards the iron fence." My 7-year-old's mind found it hard to comprehend what G was saying, and one look at Elle told me that she was experiencing the same. We both said together, "What man, G? What did he look like?" G sighed, biting her lip, a habit that she still has to today, when she's anxious or worried or trying to explain something tricky or difficult. "Well, I didn't see him properly. His face and all that, I only saw his back. He did have really long, scruffy hair, though." Her eyes wandered over nervously to the end of the garden leading out to the very public heath. Elle and I both followed G's gaze. We all shuddered, and nobody spoke for ages. For a long time we sat in silence, G and Elle sitting on the back step, and me on my wheelchair alongside of them. And suddenly, I noticed something and exclaimed to the others, "Listen, everything's back to normal." We all listened, and the regular everyday noises had returned. The world appeared to have resumed business as usual. A while later, A and his 2 mates came back, and sensing some tension from us, they asked us what was up. We did tell them everything, and 2 of them ran back to have a look around. They were gone for about 45 minutes. When they returned, they said that they didn't see anything. No strange men, no animals, nothing unusual or dodgy at all. So we spent the rest of the day hanging out with the boys, eating dinner in the bush house, and later watching films and eating junk food. We never did tell Mum about the experience until a few years back, long after we were grown, and we still don't know or cannot explain what the heck happened that day. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 19. I'm female, by the way, and had just moved out of student accommodation into an actual flat with my friend group of 6. Now, the night that we moved in, it was just me and one of the girls that I'm close friends with. Her name's Lucy. I had my boyfriend over at the time. His name's Alec. The other people who were moving in 2 weeks later, as they were all in various holidays and visiting home and whatnot. So it was just the 3 of us. Lucy was in her room, and Alec and I were smoking in bed watching kung fu movies. And it was around this time that we noticed a man, maybe around 300 pounds and 6 feet, pacing outside of our window and looking in occasionally. We're in a basement floor at this time, but the windows were on ground level. But that was really weird. We just try to make sure that the windows are locked. And 20 minutes or so pass, everything seems okay, until Lucy runs into my room and says, "There's a man in the house." It was then that we realized, too, that we had left the door unlocked by accident. And that left chills down my spine. I'm like, "What do you mean there's a man in the house?" Alec is frozen solid. Me and Lucy go into the hall, and there's this huge man who we saw looking in the windows in our hall. We ask, "What are you doing in here?" And he pulls out his phone and shows us a text message from an unsaved number with our address written on it, and something about people being inside. I didn't understand it, but he tells us that he's looking for his girlfriend and that she lives here, and we're like, "No, she doesn't. Please remove yourself from our house." He says okay, and that he'll phone his girlfriend. He turns his phone low volume and he's speaking to another man on the phone who is clearly not his girlfriend. But with more urgency this time, we tell him to get out of the house and he says okay. He leaves, we lock the door and everyone is definitely shaken. He's still on the phone, mind you, to this man outside, and they're speaking a language that we don't understand, but we can hear him getting angry. I tell Alec to please make the guy go away, and he goes outside and tells him to shift away from our doorway as he's really scaring us. He says okay, and apparently there's a taxi here for him, but he walks up a dead-end street where I can assure you that no taxis can go, and we just sit there, dumbfounded. We tell our upstairs neighbors who we had met earlier that day about the whole ordeal. Their names are Charlotte, Matt, and Rob. They inform us that the same man had tried to come into their house, apparently, insisting his girlfriend lived there as well. Charlotte already had a boyfriend who we knew of and had also met that day. Rob was definitely braver than all of us and threatened the guy with a knife the time that he came to their house, and he never bothered them again. And over the next couple of weeks, the man would occasionally come back and look into our bedroom windows. Alec was there most of the times, and to be honest, I'm really glad for that. I have no doubt that he tried the door again as well, but it was always locked after that. Eventually he seemed to drop off and lose interest, but I don't know. The whole thing was weird, and I'm just glad that it ended. In January to May of 2022, my mum and I had to move out of our house due to my father passing away unexpectedly at home. A friend of my mum's, whose mum had also passed away, who used to live in the house as well, was nice enough to offer that we live there until we could find a different house, get back up on our feet. We had stayed at this house before to watch her dogs for shorter periods of time, like for a week while they went on vacation. Every time that we would stay over, she would say, "Let me know if the spirits do anything while we're away and I'll get onto them. But don't forget to just politely tell them to stop. Don't be rude." That was pretty much exactly what she said too. We would hear noises around the house, see figures outside, see shadows down the hallway, and we would tell them to stop and it would stop for a few hours or so. But when we first settled into the new house after fully moving in, everything was fine as it should be. After that terrifying experience of my dad passing in front of us, it was a relief. But I do remember on the first night, I was on a call with my boyfriend because I couldn't sleep, and I remember hearing things that made me a little scared. My boyfriend does not believe in the paranormal, so he would always say, "Oh, it's just the house settling and whatnot." But I knew that it wasn't. Some things that have happened to me while I live in this house are as follows. I had an old cabinet that the homeowner's mother, who just died as well, used to own in my room. I had clothes and my skincare inside, so I would use it daily. It was hard to close, and we had to essentially clamp it shut or else the door would swing out by itself as well. So, like every morning, I specifically remember clamping it. But when I got home, the doors were both fully open, and one of my sweaters looked like it had been thrown on the floor. The weirdest thing, though, is that my mum had arrived home maybe 25 minutes before, and she said that the cabinet was closed, which meant that this happened in the span of like 25 minutes. Sometimes I would get home very late after being at my boyfriend's house until 9, 10, or perhaps even 11. I would get ready for bed, take a shower, and get water from the kitchen. But where my room was located, you had to walk past the front door, which is fully glass. And I would always see figures in the yard, or maybe even on the porch, walking around out there. The homeowner's mother, who died, absolutely loved one of the dogs. Her name is Lady. Whenever she wanted Lady around, she would always call out her name in a very specific and memorable way. And one day, it was just my sister and I in the house. I was in the kitchen and she was in the guest bedroom by my room. And I heard what sounded exactly like the mum yelling for Lady. It was loud. I run to my sister's room and I asked, "Did you call Lady?" And no, "Why would I?" she said. "She's laying on her bed right there." She pointed at the floor on the far side of the bed, and sure enough, there she was. Now, the final experience I will be talking about definitely is not the last I've had, but this is the biggest one for me, and it's happened to me twice now. So, everyone was there at evening. The homeowner and her husband, my mum, my sister, my boyfriend and I were all in the house at this point. We were having a big dinner. I can't remember what for, but I went into the kitchen to go and get a drink, and my sister said that she was going to do the same, so I figured that she was right behind me. I'm standing facing away from the entrance, and I swear to you that I felt someone touch my shoulder. Not too firm, but not gentle either. I say what and turn around, only to see my sister just then walking into the kitchen. My mouth dropped at that, and I asked, "Did you just touch my shoulder?" She looked at me like I was crazy. "I just walked in." I started to freak out. "No, somebody just touched my shoulder." People ran into the kitchen to calm me down. The homeowner looked at me in shock and said, "No one has ever been touched by the spirits in this house. Maybe my daughter has been years ago when she was very little. They would always mess with her, but I'm still not sure why she was exactly touched." But after that, it's safe to say that I never entered the kitchen alone ever again. So yeah, there you have it. Those are some of the experiences that I've had in that house. The last experience has forever changed my life. I think about it daily, in fact. For context too, the house is 100 plus years old. The homeowner grew up in that house and her father passed in the living room. Her mother lived with her up until a couple of days before she passed. She passed in hospice. My mum and I had moved in right after witnessing my dad pass at our house, and he very well could have followed us there, and the area of Virginia that we lived in was surrounded by battlefields, so who knows what was going on really. All I do know is that it is an experience that I will never forget. I live on this big piece of sort of farmland, I guess, with two homes. The house my husband and I live in and the house that is owned by his grandparents is a short walking distance away. We have a lot of woods surrounding our land, and we get a lot of woodland animals that come through our yard a lot. It's one thing that I really love about living here, in fact. For instance, there's a groundhog family that I've watched grow up that live by one of our sheds. They tend to mind their own business and don't bother any of our small crops. But anyways, our dogs kind of just know the territory and walk around freely between our two homes in the large field. I guess you could call them farm dogs, but they don't really do anything. My dog is a 3-legged, 15-year-old Chihuahua that manages to get around better than me somehow, and Nana's really fat beagle who would lick you to death pretty much. We're also dog-sitting my mother-in-law's big dog for 4th of July weekend since she's going to be somewhere with lots of fireworks. He really doesn't like them, and he's familiar with our home. But anyway, last night I came out of the bathroom and the big dog starts freaking out. Like whining, howling, kind of stomping his feet like he wants to show me something, if that makes sense. This isn't really unusual for him because he gets pretty mouthy when he wants to go outside, so I started going towards the door, which then he started gesturing with his head towards it. So I opened the wooden door before our screen door and he just kind of froze in our kitchen like a statue. My dog then came up behind him and froze too. They both just stared directly at me and turned their heads towards the door and sink, like they were gesturing for me to go outside. It was really uniform and weird. It's hard to describe, but it just felt so wrong for them to do it like that. But at the same time, I assumed that maybe there was a skunk outside or something. So I went out onto the porch to see our grandneighbor's dog sitting happily on our porch, which made me relax a bit. There were very distant sounds of fireworks, so I thought maybe that's what our dogs were on edge about. But then the fat beagle on the porch did the same thing, looked at me, nodded his head towards the woods like a suggestion. I noticed that he was sitting uncharacteristically still and wasn't panting and snorting like he usually does. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked around for a bit. and eventually my eyes landed at this one spot, a perfect hole between the trees that allowed me to stare back deeper into the woods a little bit, and in that spot, I saw a pair of eyes open and blink at me. Now, the rest of this is kind of a bit of a haze, but I just remember thinking, you need to go to the woods over and over again, while urging myself not to do it, like I was having a battle with a rope pulling me. It suddenly looked like there was grass that was laid perfectly for me to walk on, like I could point out spots that had been tread on by feet before. It was like there was a path made for me to walk to this pair of white eyes staring at me from the woods. My husband at this point noticed something was amiss, I guess because he heard the door open and wasn't sure where I was. I always tell him when I go outside to read or sit on the porch for a while, and I just kind of heard him behind me go, "What are you doing?" I remember saying, "I'm just looking." I specifically remember saying that too. My husband kind of started getting worried at this and started guiding me inside, but I remember saying, "I'm just looking." He finally ushered me inside and shut the door, turned around, wide-eyed, and kind of questioned, "You do not need to go out into the woods. You know that, right?" I was really confused. From what I remembered, from his perspective, what he should have seen was me standing on the porch staring into the woods. I never mentioned anything about walking out there, just had the sensation that I should move. But it was then that he told me that apparently I kept looking out like I was in a trance and saying different variations of, "I need to walk out into the woods for a little bit." Mind you, I have no recollection of this at all. I've had weird things happen to me before, but this truly filled me with dread. I don't understand what happened, and I'm honestly really frightened about any of us going outside alone for a bit. I really, really feel like there's something trying to lure us into the woods or something. I know that sounds crazy, but honestly, that's how it felt. So my husband and I were watching a scary movie the other night. We don't usually watch scary movies, but we thought that it would be fun since our kid was staying with his grandparents for the night. And about halfway through the movie, we got bored of it and decided to call it a night. It was around 11:30 at this point. We were watching it in our bed, so we just turned it off and the lights and laid down. Within maybe 30 seconds of turning off the movie, though, I began to hear a man talking. It sounded like it was coming from our basement. We live in a log home and we sleep in the loft, which is open to the rest of the house. The stairs leading up to our room are made of half logs, so you can just peer through them and see down into the stairs leading directly below into the basement, which also has no door. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. I think that I've had auditory hallucinations before I fall asleep before, so I thought that that's what this was. But we have a German Shepherd who sleeps at the top of the stairs in the loft with us, and she hadn't seemed to notice anything. About 10 seconds after hearing this voice, I hear several other sounds of something moving in the basement, jostling and sort of gentle thuds. At this point, my husband whispers, "Did you hear that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "It sounded like a man talking." And I was like, "Yeah, I heard it too." So he jumps out of bed, puts on his robe and gets the gun, and starts checking around the house. I have my phone up, ready to dial 911 if need be. He starts in the basement, nothing. All the windows are closed and locked, and the alarms on them are undisturbed. Same with the sliding door. We check the rest of the house and still nothing. I'm super freaked out at this point. He has to get up early for work though, so we go back upstairs to our bed. He goes to sleep, but I am just too freaked out, and I stay up with a lamp on ready to attack this sneaky intruder until about 2 in the morning, when I was just too tired to stay up any longer, and so I fell asleep. I heard a couple more strange noises up until I fell asleep. Most of them I just attributed to the house shifting. My box fan made a high-pitched squealing noise a few times, which I've never noticed before. Almost sounded like bats squeaking. In the end, I just couldn't relax about the situation because I just can't come up with a solution as to why this happened. I mean, the house was secured. There was no way anyone could get inside. We live in a rural area and know our neighbors. They don't wander around our property. It just doesn't make any sense. The voice didn't sound particularly threatening or anything. It sounded like a country boy talking to his buddy. Not super loud, not quiet, just a sort of casual interaction. I don't know, guys. The whole thing is weird and I just don't know what to do. Back in the summer of 2020, I was traveling with my partner to Boise, Idaho from Colorado to visit his family and stay for a camping trip. The trek is nearly 15 hours long, and while you can do it in a day, it's better if you stop to rest. Having lived in Utah at one point in time, I was pretty eager to show him the natural hot springs in Spanish Fork. They are located deep in Diamond Fork Canyon and require about a 45-minute hike from the parking lot. But still, we were both excited to get out and moving after 7 hours in the car. When we arrived at the first parking lot, however, the gate was shut and locked tight. A sign taped to the metal read closed, absolutely no access to hot springs, fines $2,000 max, or something to that nature. Obviously, we were pretty bummed. COVID had shut down many things, and we figured that this was outside, so there's no way that it was going to be closed. After some research on the government website, we discovered that a body had possibly been found in the springs and was likely the cause for the locked gate. Sad and tired of sitting in the car, we drove back down the canyon road to find a spot to camp for the night. Most of the more established campsites were closed due to COVID or were already taken for the night. This was fine though, since we prefer more dispersed camping anyway. So we picked a random spot to turn on as we drove closer to exiting the canyon. It was Road 338. Most of the road was a well-kept dirt road. We passed some promising spots near a creek and maybe 2 or 3 other people already set up for the night. We wanted to go a little further to see if there was anything with that wow factor. It sounds funny, I know, but some sites give off that this is the one feeling. Finally, though, we came to a dead end in the main road with a fire mitigation road to the right. At this very spot, there was a strange boulder with some type of inscription on it, partially surrounded by a wooden fence. And I had to investigate. The inscription read, Diamond Battle, June 20, 1866. It was a memorial for a battle that happened right here. A feeling of uneasiness and oddly respect, I guess, washed over me. After traveling up the fire road and not finding what we were hoping for in a campsite, we decided to pick a spot by the small creek that we had passed on the way in. It was getting dark quickly now, but we set up our tent in no time at all and we got a fire going. The creek was loud but peaceful. Although, ever since I read that inscription, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. I'm not a paranoid person, but I kept feeling on the edge of my seat, like someone was watching us from the woods just across the water. As the night grew darker, this feeling grew stronger as well. I decided that I didn't want to be in the open anymore and retreated to the tent to get some rest while my partner stayed up to enjoy the fire. I snuggled into our sleeping bag and I exhaled comfortably, listening to the creek that was now much quieter and was a bit further from the tent. I started to drift off when I heard it. There was soft chanting, rhythmic drums. My eyes shot open. Was I really hearing that? I strained my ears to listen over the running water. I couldn't quite get a clear sound, but something was definitely there. This is when I noticed the ground was also rumbling, as if horses were stampeding down the road, 100 feet from our site. To be honest, I didn't know if I should get out to tell my partner, but I had the strangest feeling that if I said it out loud, that it would make it more true and that an army of spirits would spring from the trees and into our campsite. Before I could make the decision, though, I must have just blacked out because Somehow, I had the most peaceful sleep that I had ever had. The next morning, a little bit confused, we packed up our tent and left with no trace that we had ever spent the night by Little Diamond Creek. When I finally entered cell service, I did a Google search of that memorial in Diamond Fork, Utah. Turns out, there was a battle there between the Utes and the Mormon militia, and lives were lost on that mountainside. After reading this, I decided to tell my partner what I had heard last night before falling asleep. I told him about the chanting and the drumming and even the stomping of the horses, and he looked at me, shock in his eyes, in disbelief, and said that he had apparently heard the exact same thing. And now that I think about it, I guess I was only in the tent maybe 10 minutes before he seemed to get spooked, standing alone by the fire, hearing this distant chanting and drums. And apparently, he came into the tent and experienced that same sort of peaceful blackout that I had. When I think back about it though, I feel as though we were being watched over by some Native Americans or something that lost their lives there. A strong but calm and protective presence, I guess. If you're ever on Diamond Park Road, I do hope you visit and pay respects to that memorial of the Diamond Battle. And who knows, maybe you'll experience something like we have. I want to preface this by saying that I don't know whether or not I actually believe in the paranormal, but what happened to me back when I was a kid was definitely abnormal, to say the least. I was 5 at the time, yet I remember it all clear as day. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of a layout of the apartment as I remember it. My bedroom was down a really long hallway, and the light bulbs in my mother's apartment would always burn out. I was used to it, and I wasn't scared of the dark at this point. That all changed that day, though. My mother's bedroom was on the opposite end of the hallway, next to the living room and in front of the bathroom. I was drawing in my bedroom, way past my bedtime, when I heard a knock on my door. I understood that I was found out, and I apologized before turning my lamp off, when suddenly the doorknob on my bedroom door started shaking violently. I thought that my mum was freaking out at me again, and I was a pretty brave kid who didn't let myself get intimidated easily. So I walked right through the room and opened the door, but when I did, there wasn't anybody. I don't know. I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear. I don't think I've ever been this scared in my life, before or since then, yet I've had weirder things happen. I ran down the dark hallway, and the whole time I was under the impression that something was chasing me through the darkness, but I never saw anything. I got to my mother's bedroom, and there she was. I snuggled up to her while she was sleeping. Unfortunately, she had pretty violent nightmares that would sometimes cause her to punch holes in the walls, and to this day she punched me in the face a few times, by accident. I would have spent the rest of the night crying on her bedroom floor if she hadn't have woken up to comfort me. There's been a lot more things that happened in that apartment, including incidents with shadow figures, and I would be willing to share those at some point, but for now this will have to do. But I guess the reason why this whole thing has had such an impact on me is the fact that that door handle was absolutely going crazy right up until the point when I opened that door. In the late 80s, my parents moved from one part of the state to another due to my dad's work. We had to live in an apartment for a while before my parents found a place to buy. I remember going with them a few times to look at older homes, as my dad wanted a deal and wanted to get a fixer-upper. Most of the older homes were really ugly and creepy though, but my parents had settled on a house that was 2 stories, 5-bedroom house with 3 bathrooms. The house was twice as big as our other house and seemed like a castle compared to living in an apartment for a few months. The house was very dated, and although out of the house there were furnishings, decorations, and stylings of the late 1960s and early 1970s, it was still very ugly. The same weekend my parents bought the house, we were all expected to pitch in and do things like tearing out the old carpet, painting, removing old wallpaper, and sanding down cabinets. There were a few times during the renovation period that my parents left one or a few of us kids there alone while they went out or went to the apartment to rest. Almost immediately, though, things started to happen in that house. Strange things at first, like a radio my parents kept there started playing music while we were working. It would turn off and on randomly. Lights would flicker, and if you were working downstairs, you would hear people walking upstairs. This happened so much that a few times I thought somebody broke into the house. After we moved in, things continued to happen. Some of the significant events were when my bedroom was upstairs and I heard someone walking up the stairway. At this time I was home alone and thought my parents returned. They hadn't. Another time I had heard a scratching at the window, and it sounded like a tree branch was rubbing up against the window, but there was nothing there, and no tree for more than 40 feet from that window. At one time, a few friends from school came over, and if you're walking up the stairs, all the way across there was a sort of wall of mirrors along the stairs, and my friend had saw a lady walking up behind her and thought that it was my mum and turned around to say hello, but nobody was there, and she screamed and literally ran out of my house. Another time, a friend had stayed the night and he slept in the room next to my room. He woke up to someone whispering next to his head in a language that he didn't know. He jumped up and ran out of the room. We looked around and woke up my parents even. My dad accused us of playing a prank, but he swore by it. Like I said too, my bedroom was upstairs and it was down a short hallway where my bedroom door was on the left, the bathroom door was on the right, and straight ahead was a guest bedroom. In the middle of the night, I woke up to hearing a motor running or something. I remember laying in my bed hearing the noise like so loud. I got up and opened my bedroom door and noticed that it seemed to be coming from the hall bathroom, and it was a hairdryer. And I mean, I rarely ever use that hairdryer, but it was in there because sometimes my sister would come upstairs to do her hair and makeup in that bathroom if the other one was occupied, as my parents didn't want us kids tying up their bathroom. The thing was, though, is that I can't remember the last time my sister was in there, and I don't remember that hairdryer being left out. My parents would often take long weekend trips back to our old city to visit friends and family, so when I got older, I was left home alone. They would take my sister, and my parents also often had foster kids, so they went along too. I would prefer it that way anyway, so I would order pizza and have a few friends over and rent a movie and all that. One of these weekends, though, I didn't get any sleep, and I couldn't get any friends who wanted to stay at my house. I was stuck there home alone for a very long, sleepless weekend, and it all started the day that my parents left. I think they took an early weekend or something and left like on a Thursday morning, so when I got home from school, the house was empty, and that night, I woke up to footsteps upstairs. It sounded like somebody was walking across the upstairs family room, but not stopping. I grabbed a bat and walked out of my room expecting to find a thief or someone who broke in, but instead, all I found was an empty room. I didn't sleep that night. The following evening I was upstairs and my friends had just left and I was home alone again. I remember that I was sitting upstairs and I heard a loud boom. It sounded like something really big had fallen over, like something really heavy. I jumped up and started to call out for my friends Chris and Mike. I thought that it was them just playing a prank on me. I ran upstairs and most of the lights were off. The front door was locked and nothing had fallen over. I searched every window and door. I searched the whole house pretty much, and everything was locked and secured, and there was nothing amiss. I barricaded my room that night and locked myself inside. Later that night, though, my girlfriend called me and we talked a bit. I didn't tell her what was going on because I didn't want her to think that I was just some kid afraid to be home alone. But during that conversation, I heard really loud footsteps outside. I got really quiet and she was on the phone asking me what was going on. Then she said, "What is that noise?" I said, "You can hear that?" I said that I'd been hearing that all night, and she said to get out of the house now. I told her no, that it happened a lot. She stayed with me on the phone until about 4 in the morning, and eventually she just fell asleep. I started to fall asleep again too, but then the footsteps started up again. When I left my room at about 7 in the morning, I walked downstairs and found that one of the lights that I had left on, and I know that I had left that one on, it was now off. I quickly checked to see if the bulb had burnt out, but no, it had been switched off. The final night I was home alone, I had grabbed my dad's shotgun and kept it in my room with me. I was absolutely terrified. It was about 3 a.m. I was startled awake by what sounded like the garage door from the garage to the house. You know, the regular door, not the big garage door. And it honestly sounded like somebody just slammed it full force. And at that, I was absolutely sure that someone had broken into our house now. It made sense our car was gone and the house looked empty, so I grabbed the shotgun, put a shell in it, and walked down my hallway towards the stairway. I turned on the lights for the front room, and there was a switch for it at the top of the stairs. The front room was empty, so I slowly made my way down the stairs and went over to the garage door. The door was locked. I looked at the front door, and it was locked too. I went to the kitchen, turning on every light in the house, room to room, searching everywhere, including closets, under beds, you name it. Pantry and washroom, everywhere. I ended my search in my parents' room, which was the furthest point in the downstairs. And when I was in my parents' bathroom, I heard, just above me, footsteps. Right above my parents' room was the guest room upstairs. I immediately ran upstairs, shotgun pointing as I ran. I burst that door open and found an empty room with an empty bed. I don't know how I didn't pull the trigger when I bust open the door, as my finger was on the trigger. I was absolutely convinced that somebody else was in the home with me. I know, it's bad trigger discipline, but like I said, I was expecting to find a murderer or a burglar in that room. I cleared the house twice, again looking absolutely everywhere. By the time the lights started to appear outside, I ended up upstairs, sitting on a sofa with the TV on, half asleep with the shotgun still loaded next to me. I then emptied the gun and I put it back before my parents found me with it. A while after that, still having some odd things in the house like unexplained shadows, noises, lights turning off and on, I just sort of started to live with it, I guess. One summer, my dad wanted me to clean the garage and suggested that I use the attic above the garage to put the things that we didn't use anymore in there. Just boxes of old financials, old toys and luggage and whatnot. But when I was up there, I noticed something. The attic above the garage was huge, like almost another room. But then there was a wall that sort of separated the garage wall to the house, so I looked at it thinking that this isn't actually the back of the restroom or the guest bedroom, it just didn't make sense. I then jumped down out of the attic and went outside. I'd never noticed this before, but between the stairs and the areas that connected over the garage attic, there was actually a huge space there. On top of that, there was a metal vent the exact same size as the guest bedroom window. I went back inside the house looking for clues, and sure enough, there was what appeared to be a void. And at the top of the stairs, I looked at the wall and thought, wow, there used to be a door there. I jumped up into the attic space above the garage and cut a hole into the drywall leading back to the back of the house. I cut a hole big enough for my head to go through. I looked inside, and in there was a whole nother bedroom. That bedroom had its carpet ripped up, but still, the strips along the wall that held the carpet, that was all still there, and it had old yellow and pink wallpaper. It looked like it used to be maybe a girl's room or something, because one of the walls, the one that I had cut through, it was painted pink, like Pepto-Bismol pink. I enlarged the hole big enough to climb into it, and found an old table-like bed side table, old beer cans, an old empty pack of cigarettes, and just trash like crumpled up newspapers. I had asked my parents if they knew about the room, and my dad was kind of upset with me for cutting into the drywall. I had told him that there's another bedroom and excited about finding it. He said that he didn't want to open it and just leave it alone. I got the idea that somehow they knew about the extra bedroom, but for whatever reason didn't want to open it or deal with it or something. You see, my parents were very strict religious people, and any talk of ghosts, hauntings, or spirits was opening up an invitation to the demons to enter the home. I found out early on that I couldn't talk about things like noises, shadows, or footsteps without facing their wrath, even to my own siblings, because they would rat me out. I was already on really thin ice for not living up to their standards at this point. But anyway, my parents had a long-time foster kid who was just a few weeks younger than me, and one time I had found her sitting upstairs alone, and at first I thought that she had just gotten into trouble due to the way that she looked. It was like she was pale and almost in tears. I walked by and said something like, "Oh, what did you do? What happened?" She looked at me shaking and said nothing. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "I'm just scared," and I asked her why, and she said that she couldn't tell me. I thought that it had something to do with the reason that why she was a foster kid or something. I said, "Oh, okay, I understand." But as I was walking away, she said, "Do you think that there are ghosts?" I stopped dead in my tracks and looked at her like, "What did you just say?" She looked scared and started to be like, "Oh, nothing, never mind." I came over to her and sat next to her and said, "Have you been hearing things or seeing things in this house?" She looked at me like in shock and scared to say anything, like if she did, she'd get in trouble with my parents or something. I whispered to her, though, that I know what you mean, but we have to keep this a secret. I wasn't sure what my parents would do if they found out that we were talking like this. So we sat upstairs whispering together and sharing our experiences. She confirmed that she sees shadows outside of her bedroom window. She hears footsteps, she notices lights turning off and on, and she thought that she was going crazy or making it up in her head. I told her about all of my experiences and how the same things happened to me. I even told her about the times that I was home alone. And well, not too long after this all went down and my parents had to rush out of our old town due to a family emergency, and had said that my oldest sibling was going to come over and stay with me and the foster kid. By that time I was like 16, so I knew it was mainly because of the foster kids, so I just agreed. My parents ended up having to spend the night near the hospital or something, but they didn't make it back home, and my older sibling flaked on coming over, so I was home alone with this foster kid. Now, my parents had foster kids since I was a baby, so I grew up in that situation. I knew how to handle it, I guess is what I'm getting at. We ate dinner. I think it was microwave corn dogs, chips and sodas that night. She went to her bedroom as her bedtime was like 8:45 or something, and I stayed upstairs watching TV. To be honest, I was kind of glad that she was in the home with me, because at least there was one other person in the house. But I think it was around midnight. She ran upstairs and asked if she could sleep on the sofa next to me. I instantly knew that something had happened, so I agreed, but being the typical teenager boy, I gave her a bit of stick for it. You just want to watch TV or get away with things when mum and dad are away, don't you? But deep down, I knew what she was going through. We both ended up sleeping on the sofa, and well, it was a sectional, so she slept on one side and I slept on the other. I woke her up at like 6 in the morning and told her to run down to her room as I didn't want my parents to see us sleeping like that. Not that anything happened, but you know. Most of my high school friends knew about my house too, and for some it became a popular place to come and check out. Most of the time when they were there, nothing really ever happened. Well, there was this one time though. My dad was working out of town and my mum and sister and foster kids were out late with church people, I think. I was home alone and a couple of my friends came over and we were watching TV upstairs. We decided to raid the fridge at one point. We were all downstairs, and since we had paused the movie on the VHS, we were downstairs and, like I said, upstairs had no noise from the TV. But we all looked at each other together as we heard the footsteps walking across the room just above our heads. My friends could barely believe it, but I said, "Yeah, that's right. That's the footsteps that I hear all the time." They were all a little bit scared, but they thought that there had to be someone up there. So I said, "Come back upstairs and I'll show you." I showed them, and after that, one by one, they all wanted to get out of the house, especially one of the girls who was panicked so bad that she fell twice running out of the house. Now, this was all before Google and the internet like we know it today, so I had to go to the public library to look for anything about our old house, and I pretty much found nothing. I remember I even had to ask the librarian if there was a way to look up if somebody died in a house, and her reaction to me was like I was a stupid kid just annoying her. I knew that one of the homes in the block that my parents had once mentioned, that there was an old guy that lived there, one of the oldest, apparently since the 60s, so I found out which neighbor that was and decided to go and talk to him. One evening he was working on something in his garage, so I went over and started talking to him about the city, history, and how it used to look when he first moved in. Then, once I got him talking enough where I felt comfortable, I asked him if something ever happened in my house. He was at first like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, like, if anybody had died there." He stopped what he was doing and said, "Well, what have you heard?" I said nothing, but told him about the closed-up room, and I didn't tell him about the paranormal stuff, obviously, but just said that it would make sense if something happened there. He looked at me very serious and said, "Well, a long, long time ago, there was an accident, and the family had teenage and older kids living in that house, but the accident involved a family member who didn't live at the house, apparently." He wouldn't go into details except that he said maybe ask my parents about it because surely they know more than him. Then he changed the subject and didn't want to tell me more about it. And to this day, I never found out what actually happened, or if even anything actually did happen in that house, or to somebody who lived at that house. Sometimes I do wish that I had more answers, but other times, maybe I'm better off not knowing. This event happened about a year ago, but it has always stuck with me. I haven't been able to find a lot of clear information about it, so I would love to hear any possible explanations that you might have. So, my family recently moved to rural Pennsylvania, about 10 minutes from the West Virginia border, and about 20 minutes from Ohio. To get home now, I drive through a lot of farmland. One afternoon, while heading home, I was passing a cornfield, going about 45 miles per hour, when I immediately felt my whole body stiffen and had an overwhelming feeling of just being watched. I found myself sitting up completely straight up in my seat, turning down my music and gripping the steering wheel tighter. I was on an empty back road, so I figured if my instincts were kicking in, there must be an animal nearby or something. I slowed down to about 35 miles per hour, and I glanced around to see if I saw a bear or a coyote or maybe even a sketchy person. And it was then that I noticed two glowing red eyes peering out from the cornstalks on my right, about 10 feet in front of my car. A feeling of "this is not good or safe" washed over me all of a sudden, so I instantly hit the gas and sped off to my house. Once I got there, I sat there trying to figure out what the heck I just saw. Maybe someone's laser lights on a hunting rifle, maybe something reflected against my headlights strangely, but just nothing seemed to adequately explain what I saw, my sense of panic, and/or the overwhelming feeling of malicious intent that came from those eyes. My best guess was that it was a really big owl, but This happened during the day, so that just doesn't make any sense. Also, the fact that it happened during the day, those eyes must have been real bright to shine that light, so bright that it was easy to distinguish between it and the daylight. Whatever it was, the moment has always stuck with me, and I'd like to know if a red-eyed corn thing is a common thing to encounter, and if so, what is it? When I passed the same spot later that day, coming from the opposite direction, I felt hesitant or cautious driving by, but not unsafe like I did that time. Maybe whatever I saw had moved on by then, I don't know, but I just want to have an idea of what the something that moved on might have been. So I used to live in a 3-story house with my parents, younger sibling, and our dog. We moved into this house a few months before my younger sibling was born, and that was when we first met the neighbors across the street. Lucas, who was the oldest child in their family, was always a bit strange. And there were some aspects of his personality that were more than just strange. They were straight up disturbing. It would take hours to cover everything, so I'm just going to get straight to the point. I'm almost positive that Lucas has been inside of our house in the middle of the night. Our house was built on a hill, so it looked like it was only 2 stories from the front, and the basement was connected to the backyard. But the yards in this neighborhood were much larger than they are in the newer housing developments, so it would have been very easy for someone to enter our backyard unnoticed. Despite this, my family was terrible about making sure all of the basement doors were always locked. My younger sibling and I would always go in and out when we were playing in the backyard, or someone would go down to let the dog out, and we would end up forgetting to lock one of the doors before bed. We also lived in an area where it was common for people to leave their doors unlocked. However, my family did always lock the door leading down to the basement every night, along with all of the other doors on the main level of the house. I had a really messed up sleep schedule back then too, so I would usually be still awake at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And there are 2 specific instances that happened very late at night, which make me think that Lucas has been inside of our house without our knowledge. So one night, I was in my bedroom on the upper level of the house. It was probably around 2:30 in the morning when I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. It was probably 2:30 in the morning when I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. Thinking that my dog had spotted a cat in the front yard, I quickly rushed downstairs to stop him from barking and waking up my entire family. This kind of thing would happen every now and then, so I wasn't thinking too much of it at the time. But instead of going downstairs and finding my dog by the front window, I found him by the locked door that leads down to the basement. The fur on the back of his neck was standing up, and his nose was pressed to the bottom of the door. I instantly froze when I realized what was happening. There was something or someone on the other side of the basement door. I was barely a teenager at the time, so I began to panic and started making my way upstairs as quietly as possible. I woke up both of my parents, but neither of them took me very seriously. My dad just assumed that my dog was hearing random noises coming from outside, but he did eventually go down to check things out. He said that everything downstairs looked normal, but he also mentioned that he forgot to lock one of the basement doors that night. Then, there was another time that I was up late and in my room, but this time, instead of hearing my dog growling, I heard a loud bark that echoed through the entire house. The sound was sudden and intense, similar to a gunshot, I suppose, and it almost made me jump out of my chair at first. Assuming again that my dog had seen a cat outside, I quickly looked out of my bedroom window and tried to spot whatever he was barking at, but my heart suddenly dropped when, instead of seeing a cat, I saw Lucas running out of our front yard in the pitch black. I watched him run across the street and back towards his own house before I rushed to close the curtains and duck out of sight. I remember sitting there struggling to process what I had just seen, and questioning why Lucas would be in our yard in the middle of the night like that. I told my mum about it the very next morning, and she said that she would bring it up to Lucas's mum. But because of these two instances, and because of other details that I cannot really include, I'm almost 99% sure that Lucas has been inside of our house in the middle of the night. If you knew the entire story behind this family, then you would also find the thought of this to be extremely disturbing. I do want to mention, though, that this all happened years ago. My family no longer lives in that house, and those neighbors across the street are doing fine, but looking back on everything now, I'm realizing just how creepy the situation truly was. I work as an inspection clerk for a real estate agency in a medium-sized town, a mining town actually. So, needless to say, I see a lot of houses. It's worth noting too that a lot of houses are really creepy. With big inspections, I could be in a house till it's getting dark out. In my job, I take pictures of a range of categories in an area, for example, like the walls, the ceiling, windows, floor, cupboards. You get the picture. Noises like ticks and tacks are common occurrences. I attribute them to the house settling or the roof getting hot and cold, etc. But one day, one of the agents comes to me and asks me to do an inspection on a house that she was apparently too freaked out to do herself. And this house had my hair on edge the moment that I got in the front door. I would describe my feeling as an urge to get out or that I'm in danger. From the start, my senses are all over the place. They normally are. I mean, I'm always aware that someone could come in behind me. I always lock the gates and main doors behind me because of this. So, putting my feelings aside, trying not to listen to them, I start my work. I'm doing the entrance, the dining room, and I get to the living room. There's a door to the front yard in the living room, and I note that the windows, door, and curtain fixtures are of a pretty old style, I guess. So I begin noting down that the house must be pretty old, and that was when I start to hear someone's feet shuffling coming from the hallway behind me. It almost sounded like morning and slippers going to make coffee with a yawn type of shuffle. I pause for a bit and listen, but it doesn't happen again, so I just go back to work. Down the hallway, there's another mirror at the end with 2 rooms on my right and 2 bathrooms on my left. I go into the first room on the right. I notice a strong odor and think that it must be the carpet. Turns out that it was rotten. There's also a lot of stains on the carpet, and as I'm sort of jotting this down, I hear a voice. At first I thought it was the agent checking up on me, so I walk to the front door and I see nothing. So I go back to work feeling a little bit more on edge now. I go back to working, marking down the stains on the carpet, and this time I hear a distinctive no. I stop dead in my tracks and start looking around the room, really freaked out at this point. I couldn't see anything or anyone, so I finish the room and I head to the main bedroom, keeping an eye out, now convinced that there must be somebody in the house with me. I finish up the room without much happening. I'm walking out of the room into the hallway, typing notes on my phone, when out of the corner of my eye, I see someone that looks like a person in the mirror, directly on my right, standing at the end of the hall. I turn to the mirror, and when I do, it's nothing. I look down the hall, and there's nobody there. I let out a quiet and big gasp as this happened and sort of chuckled at myself eventually. Heading into the room in front of me that leads to an entertainment area, I then hear the shuffling again from the hall. I'm standing there listening when the first bedroom's door slams shut. Panicking, I'm going through the whole house trying to find someone messing with me, but there's nobody there. But it's then that I hear a female voice loudly saying, "Move." This time, I definitely heard it too. I really heard it. I start to head to the front door because my nerves are absolutely shot. As I get to the front door, the first room's door that I have opened again slams shut, so now I'm just noping it out of the house. I stand outside collecting myself, ready to go back in. I say a prayer for myself and I go back into the entertainment area. Nothing much happens after that, just some shuffling in the hall as before, but eventually I'm just too far to hear it. I finish the inspection and start heading out. Unlocking the front door, I hear "now" in the same voice. By this point, I am absolutely done with this, and I just say back, yeah, I'm leaving, and I hightail it out of there as fast as I could. Later, I learned the man staying there had lost his job and wife in the same month. His mother was sickly and in bed most of the time in the first month, hence the smell and the stains. I'm unsure if she passed away in that house, but all I know is that he went missing for 4 months, not paying rent, and was apparently evicted. The maintenance guy comes to me after work is done and said, "Dude, that house is freaky," telling me that his guys were telling him stories about stuff happening, like light switches turning off by themselves, moans and noises, you name it. The house is now being rented by the mines for their workers, but I haven't heard anything from them yet. But I doubt that it'll last long. I used to participate in a group that did activities intended towards children. We usually went to neighborhoods to make games for the kids and so on, and on Halloween, we usually went to give candy to children while in costumes. That night, I was dressed up as the Joker. So I went to the rally point and met the other guys and girls with whom we were going to give candy. We were about 30 or 40. The night went as planned. We did some games, then we handed out some candies, and then we said goodbye. 3 of my best friends were there, and after the activities were over, we sort of sat on a bench and talked about random stuff. Eventually, we got to the topic of Halloween parties and how we never went to one. We really wanted to go to a Halloween party too, dance, drink, do teenager stuff. I'm kind of an introvert, but I've always tried to live my life, so when I'm old that I don't have to regret not doing stuff, and partying was definitely one of them. So I too wanted to go to a Halloween party. We called our friends, but nobody knew of any party around. Eventually we got in touch with our friend Lewis, who was 18 at the time, asking if he wanted to do something. He told us that he was going to round up a few people and then we could go out in 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, we went to a friend's house. We cleaned up, changed clothes, and then Lewis called us back. He told us to go to a park nearby to get together. We went and we reunited with 6 of his friends. 4 we knew and the other 2 we didn't, but they were nice enough. Thinking about what to do next because his house was now unavailable. We really didn't know what to do, so we ended up going to a skate park nearby to see one of them and do some tricks and stuff with his kind of eccentric skateboarding, and we were all in awe, but after a few minutes we got tired down. After that we went to the cemetery to tell horror stories. Disrespectful, I know, but we were teenagers doing stupid teenager stuff. After that, Lewis said, "Do you guys want to go and drink?" And we all said, "Yeah, let's drink," and we went to a convenience store to buy some alcohol. I think I have to say that in Chile, people from 16 are expected, yet not legally allowed to drink, unless they're with an adult or something, and we were with people from 18 to 21 years old. Legally, adult age is 18 here, which is also the drinking age. But we had the alcohol, but we didn't have a place to go and drink it, so we went to a forest that was about 15 minutes outside of town. We couldn't really see much, so we had our phone flashlights on. When we got to a nice quiet spot, we lit up a fire. We made sure that there was no flammable material nearby, obviously. And in front of us was an open field. Behind us was a wall of bushes. And as the night went on, we spent hours listening to music, drinking, telling funny stories, laughing, playing tag at one point. It was a really good time. That is, until it wasn't. So before I continue, I think I have to explain what a flate is. In Chile, a flate is sort of like a gangster. They tend to form gangs, and those who are in gangs tend to be really violent and short-tempered. They usually carry firearms or knives at least. This is a really vague description that I'm giving, as not all of them are bad people, and some are very friendly in fact, but it serves the story, so I think that's all you really need to know. But anyway, after a while of dancing and drinking, we were kind of wasted, except for Lewis, his girlfriend, and her sister, all okay, which decided to remain sober in case something came up. We played hide and seek and tag, and it was really fun and a very good time, like I said. But then, while we were dancing, we heard something in the bushes. At first, we thought that it was an animal, like a rat or a bird, so we didn't think too much of it. We continued dancing around, and I remember seeing, clear as day, a stone suddenly coming at me a few centimeters away from my leg. I thought Lewis kicked it at first, and I told him, "Dude, stop kicking rocks this way." He laughed it off and thought that I was drunk and joking, I think. And while I was kind of wasted, I definitely still had my senses about me. But then I saw another rock going in front of my eyes. It was like in slow motion this time, and I looked up, and I saw on Lewis's face a sheer expression of horror. I suddenly got scared as well. The only thing that he said to me was, "Run," and I was like, "What?" And he screamed at me, "Dude, run! Someone's throwing rocks at us." I ran back to town, to the houses and the lights. Behind me, people were screaming, "Run and hurry." I ran as fast as I could. I was kind of drunk, like I said, and the terrain was really muddy, so it was difficult. It was also really dark, and I couldn't see really where I was going. All I knew was that I was running towards the lights. I ran until I reached the same spot where we came from in town, and then I waited. I was alone and nobody came. I didn't know where my friends were, but after a while a friend of mine showed up. He screamed at me, "Dude, give me your jacket or something. They hit Fred on the head." When they came closer to the light, I saw him helping the others walk. Upon seeing his face, blood was running down everywhere and dripping. I immediately gave him my jacket and called an ambulance. Then some of my other friends came, one by one. They all went to Lewis's place because it was nearby. Then Lewis came. "Where's my girlfriend and my sister-in-law?" he said. I told him that she didn't come through. We sent everyone to his house and waited for the two missing people. We were ready to go and face the people throwing rocks in case they were doing something to them, but then, thankfully, they appeared. His girlfriend was hysterically screaming. "They hit my sister. They hit her. She's bleeding." We went to her, and the whole side of her face was just covered in blood. We rushed her to Lewis's house and made sure that we were all there. We were, and so we calmed down a bit, but when the ambulance came, the two who got hit went there with them, and we then called the cops. Now, I remember some of us being in shock, others were angry, and others were kind of in the middle ground. Lewis was raging, saying those stupid kids and so on and so forth. We didn't know who threw the rocks, obviously. I thought that we got into the terrain of somebody without knowing, and the owner tried to scare us away or something, but my friends told me that they saw a group of people hiding in the bushes. We left everything at the bonfire, the skateboards, the speaker, the wallets even. For me, I had everything safe, which I was grateful for, but for others, they obviously lost stuff. But Lewis then told me and my friends, "Dude, let's go find these guys." I was mad, but most of all, I wanted to try and retrieve some of the stuff that people had left there, so I told him that we should go, but if there were too many of them, then we should turn back. He called two of his friends, and in 5 minutes they were with us. I knew them because of some school stuff, but they were very loyal, and they both went to the gym and were pretty big fellas, so I felt safe when they came. Eventually, we went out to look for the people who threw the rocks, and when we were about a block away from the forest, we saw them, walking with our speakers, the skateboard, and other stuff that we left there. It was almost like a Mexican standoff. We were a block away from them, and we just sort of stared at each other. There were like 15 of them and only 6 of us, so in the end we didn't really do anything and just turned back. But as we got a good look at them, they were clearly gangsters. So they probably had guns and knives, which was one of the reasons why we didn't confront them. But when we got back home, we actually ran into the police car, and there were two of them. One got out of the car, and we told them that we called and explained the situation pretty quickly because we didn't want the guys to run away. However, the officer told us, "You're telling me that you're drinking, being minors, and then got attacked?" Well, we told him yes, and then he responded with the most upsetting stuff ever. "So you minors were drinking, having a bonfire in the forest in the middle of the night, and now are asking me to give you justice? Don't you kids realize how hypocritical you guys are?" I responded with, "We were in supervision of 3 adults, and not because we were drinking we deserve rocks being thrown at our heads." He looked at me with an expression of just pure hatred. I was really scared but angry as well, and he then repeated himself. We told him the guys were running away as we spoke with all of our stuff, but he kept saying that it was our fault, that it was our problem that we were in that situation to begin with. After a few minutes, though, the one inside the car told the other, "Hey, let's find the other people and then we can question these kids." And the other got inside. We waited at the house, but they never came back. And eventually, we all just went to our respective homes, and Lewis told us the next day that the policemen, they never returned. And so, that was the end of the night. It was a really scary moment, but when I remember it, it kind of makes me smile in a way too, because I have a good story to tell in moments like this. The two that got sent to the hospital, they did have to get some pretty serious stitches in their heads and were hospitalized for a couple of days because of how serious it was. But after a few days, we spoke of it like it was nothing, but we were really angry at the police, to be honest. We even speculated about whether or not they were in on it or something, because their behavior was really weird. But if you got this far, then thanks for listening, and hopefully I don't ever have to experience anything like this ever again. So for some context for this story, my cats were separated, with one in the attic with me and one downstairs with my family, because they fought, and my upstairs cat is now petrified of the other one, even being on the same floor. But my siblings constantly left the attic door open, and the downstairs cat would come up and start problems. My attic is set up though, where on one side was the staircase leading into an open room, then a short hallway, then the door to my room that took up the rest of the attic. But anyway, I was in my room, Rule 7, and have a clear line of sight to where the attic stairs are in case someone came up. Then I see my downstairs cat run up and lay on the bed that we have in the other room. At this point, I'm annoyed because I'm always telling them not to let her up here, not to leave the door open either. So then my younger sister runs up with a look like, oh my goodness, they already saw that the cat came up, so I walk into the other room and start going off on her. Not yelling, but sternly telling her, I've already asked you to not to leave the door open and make sure the cat didn't come up, so now you have to grab her and take her downstairs because I'm not doing it again. And she starts whining. Come on, I'm afraid she's going to scratch me, and she's not going to scratch you, and even if she does, that's your problem. You wouldn't have to grab her if you just closed the door. She says, can't you grab her this time again, and then if she comes up again, I'll do it. I say, no, I'm tired and I'm not doing it. At this point, I turn to my right to look at the cat on the bed, but she's not there anymore. I look in my room, since my door is still open and my upstairs cat is sitting in the middle of the floor unbothered and watching us bicker. So I assume that the cat ran under the bed to avoid being dragged downstairs or something. I look at my sister again, point to the end of the bed and say, grab the cat. She says, come on, I don't want to get scratched, can you please do it? I'm getting more annoyed having to tell her over and over, so I end up yelling at her, you need to grab the cat and take it downstairs right now because I'm not going to tell you again. Then, this little girl had the audacity to look me right in the eye and giggle, almost laughing at me, but fell by the foot of the bed and laid on the floor to look under the bed for the cat. Now, where she was sort of out of my line of sight because it was a tall and wide bed, so the mattress blocked her body almost entirely. I stood there waiting, watching my cat still just looking at me from my room, and then I realized that she was taking way too long and didn't even sound like she was moving at all to try and reach for the cat. I turn back and say, "Hey Steph, come on this side and see if you can catch her here. She's probably by the wall." There's no answer, no movement, nothing. "Steph, get up and check over here. You're not going to reach her if..." And as I'm walking over, I notice that there's a green storage container exactly where my sister would have been laying down. In fact, my sister wasn't there at all. The downstairs cat wasn't there, and my cat was still in my room just watching me. I slowly backed into my room and I locked the door, and then I proceeded to shut myself in the room until I almost wet myself because I was too afraid that I'd see whatever spoke to me again. I eventually did go downstairs to use the bathroom, and I asked my father and sister if any of them went upstairs at all today, but they all said no. I have never, ever hallucinated before or after this happened. I've also never experienced anything like it since, and I know that I saw whatever it was. I heard it talk to me. In fact, it had an entire conversation with me, and then it laughed right in my face. So I'm not sure of the relevance of my background, but in any case, I am originally from rural northern Ontario, Canada, and have always spent most of my time in the woods or nature, regardless of where we moved. Over the years, I've seen some weird stuff, but this experience, it definitely takes the cake. So when I was 16 years old, living with my mum in rural-ish New Jersey, USA, my best friend and I had an experience that we both still remember vividly, and my wife wants me to share this story too to see what other people think that we saw. So, my buddy and I used to cut through this farmer's field between my mum's neighborhood and our local mall, maybe a mile or so long. It rarely had crops over the years, maybe one year a row of corn and a few years cutting through it, but that's only if I remember it right. The field was barren on this day anyway, and we were headed to the mall to hang out. We didn't notice anything unusual on the way to the mall through the field. We stayed in the mall about maybe an hour or two, and we went back through the field to get back to my mum's. We didn't drink or eat anything in the mall that I remember, no drug usage or alcohol either. But when we got to the tree line between the field and the mall, we saw a handful of people, all dressed somewhat similar in overalls of some sort, plaid shirts, collecting things off of the ground. I figured that they were harmless, and we knew the old guy's name who owned the field, so probably wouldn't get yelled at if we name-dropped. As we made our way through the field and got closer, I remember feeling a lot of sort of static energy. It looked like they were picking up smoking coals off the ground and throwing them in buckets or something. Weird, but we didn't say anything to these folks and just kind of skirted around them until we were nearing the tree line back to my mum's neighborhood. We heard a loud whooshing noise, sort of like maybe an air compressor or something, but we turned back and there was a group of 6 identical white-suited men with sort of Daft Punk-esque helmets that seemed to be shooting, silently like their weapons made no noise, at the folks picking those things up off of the ground. Their sidearms looked like the guns used to spread weed killer or paint sprayer, really long and thin, but they didn't seem to notice us watching until my friend went into a panic and started freaking out. I grabbed him by his shirt and started dragging him toward the tree line, but he was in some sort of shock or something, and I looked back as we were running, and they were all facing us but not pursuing. My friend went home, and we didn't talk to each other for about a week. Everyone that we've told to date has said that we were mad, minus my wife and father. I will say, though, that after that initial whoosh, we never heard another noise, not even a cricket for the whole encounter. It was almost like sound was just gone all of a sudden, until we made it back across the tree line, that is. Anyway, I really don't know what to make of this. it was creepy for sure, and I'm curious to know what you guys think that we saw. My wife has always said that it was a glitch, and other people have strange encounters and share them here, so I thought, hey, why not? See what other people think. A few years back, we were having a brutally cold winter where we are, and the snow had frozen into ice and covered everything. It was pitch black in the backyard when I went to let my dog outside one last time before bed that evening. As we exited the house from the sliding door of the walkout basement and onto the lower deck, I felt that something was just off. Our house backs up to some woods, so I was accustomed to hearing noises from wildlife in the night. But this night was different for some reason. Nothing made a sound except the Arctic cold wind, but I had the feeling that I was being watched. The entire time my dog was in the backyard, I looked around sort of nervously, expecting a coyote or other predator to pop out of the tree line or something. My dog did his business, but afterwards stopped and stared at the corner of the woods until I got creeped out and called him back inside. I quickly locked the sliding door and shut the curtains, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that I had outside. After double and triple checking all of the locks in the house, I ended up just going to bed. Around 3 a.m, though, I hear the muffled sound of my dog barking from the basement 2 floors below. I got up, sort of stumbled down 3 flights of stairs and found him standing at the basement sliding door. He was peeking his head through the closed curtains, barking his head off with the hair standing up all along his back. I tried calling him away from the door, but he just wouldn't let up. I dreaded peeking out of the curtain to see what he was barking at after the uneasy feeling that I had earlier in the night. But finally, I held my breath and I swiped the curtain aside. I peered into the inky blackness, but saw nothing to cause any alarm. A wave of relief washed over me, and I figured that it must have been a deer or a raccoon in the yard that set him off or something. He whined at the door for a few more minutes until I eventually bribed him upstairs with a dog cookie. I went back to bed, and thankfully I wasn't disturbed again. That is, until the morning when I went to the basement to let out the dog. I opened the sliding door and walked out onto the deck as he bounded into the snow. And my blood ran as cold as the sub-zero morning temperatures when I looked down, because there, frozen into the ice on the deck, was a set of bare human footprints. They were very clear, and I could even make out each toe on the person's foot. The prints were large, though, and appeared to be from an adult male, I would guess. Looking around, I noticed that they started at the base of the deck, went to the sliding door and the window of the basement living room, then seemed to disappear off the side of the deck. I had my snow boots on, so I walked around the yard, but I could find no trace of footprints in the snow once they left the deck area. Keep in mind, too, that the daily temperatures that winter barely made it above 0 Fahrenheit, and the wind chill made it feel below 20 at least. Frostbite would have set in within a matter of maybe minutes for anyone walking around barefoot, especially in the dead of night like that. It was weird, and I never experienced anything like that again, but I did adopt a second dog shortly thereafter to just keep an eye on things. So my friends went to Mexico for a vacation and asked me to house sit and take care of their dogs while they were gone. They pay me $40 a day just to, well, basically sit around and let the dogs out when they need to go. I am disabled though, so that helps a lot. This is a semi-rural area and houses are roughly a quarter-mile apart. Police have to come from a town maybe 15 miles away, and response time can be well over an hour. I always take my pistol with me because of this too. It's always been quiet when I've stayed there, but this time was definitely different. I was in the shower when the dogs started barking and growling. They are big, large German shepherds, and one is actually police trained. The owners loan him to county as a drug dog, and if you tell them to be quiet, they do obey. But this time, they didn't. So, obviously I was on high alert. I shut off the water and looked out the window. I didn't see anything, but when I walked out of the bathroom, I saw a shadow go across the bedroom window. They have lights around the house that stay on all night. I whispered to the dogs to hush, and they did. And that's when I heard a man's voice. I couldn't make out everything that he was saying, but I distinctly heard 2 words, "Come around." So I'm sure that there was more than one person out there. I ran into the living room with my pistol and saw the door handle turn. I yelled, "I have a gun and I'm willing to use it." And at that, I heard feet run away. I was telling Siri to dial 911 and got the county sheriff quickly. She said that there were 2 cars on another call not far away, but it took maybe about 20 minutes for them to actually get there. That's better than the usual hour, I admit, but I was pretty shaken. I explained that I was on a farm and would have to go down to the road and unlock a cattle gate to let them in, and to please tell the officers that I would be carrying a pistol and please don't shoot me by mistake because I was not going outside the house without it. The dispatcher said, "Don't go out there without your gun, I'll tell them." The one good thing about living in a red state. She asked, though, if I could see the road, and I can, and she said to wait in the house until I saw blue lights. I hung up and I called my friends in Mexico. The camera footage can be downloaded via the app, and they said that they would go through it while I waited for the cops. I locked the house and went down to the gate when the police arrived. They searched the whole place, including the barn, but they didn't find anything. While they were looking, my friends texted me the camera footage, though, and there was a man on the porch. Unfortunately, the cameras were sort of not angled to get the shot of his face, and it was of course dark as well. But I still think that there was more than one creep because of what he said, "Come around." The police were very nice and said that they had passed a man on a bike on the way, which was strange for this area, especially at night, and went to look for him, but that's all that they could really do. They did take a full report, but they never caught the creep. My husband came and stayed with me the rest of their trip, and one of their neighbors said that he actually found a tent and some gear in the woods a few weeks before. So somebody was actually living back there. Maybe a homeless person from the town? I have house sat again since then, and it was quiet this time. They're going away again for Christmas, and I'll be there again. A lot of people ask me if I would have shot the creep had he broken in, and yeah, absolutely. I would be sorry that I would have to have hurt somebody, but it's either them or me, so yeah, I would do it. So I'll start with some brief context. I had lived with an abusive male partner who didn't value my safety whatsoever. He got really mad if I didn't leave the door unlocked, and we lived in a not-so-great part of town as well. He was way older than me. I was barely 18 at the time, and he was 26. Neither of us owned a car. He worked at Waffle House, and I was getting sick constantly, so keeping a job wasn't easy for me at that time. He liked drugs and alcohol, and he traumatized me in regards to both, blamed me for his usage, and would assault me while on it. Fun fact, too, is that he said that if I reported his conduct, he would blame me because he was the one on the substance. But anyway, I digress. When I finally got the courage to leave, for the last time, I did it while he was at work. I begged my mum to help me get my necessities, stuff with emotional value and some clothes. But instead, she called the cops and there was a warrant for his arrest, and she got a police escort just in case. And as soon as he got out, he immediately started messaging me from different new numbers, threatening to murder me and my family if I didn't go home with him. It didn't matter how much I blocked him, he just kept at it too. I was scared, but I thought for the most part that I was safe. After all, I was quite far away and he didn't have a car. But I was definitely wrong. About a week into this, he and his gun-owning friend showed up. He banged on the door and was screaming. His friend owning a gun is important too, because he repeatedly said that he and his said friend would shoot us. My window is on the second floor facing the street, and my stomach dropped when he saw me. I immediately dropped and army crawled to my little brother's room and hid in the closet. His window faced the backyard, and I guess my monkey brain felt safer there for whatever reason, but I was the only one home and scared that if I breathed too loud, he would hear me. I was terrified. I didn't want to call the police because my dumb butt thought that he'd hear that too, but I silently texted my mum. Police arrived about 20 minutes after my mum said that they were on their way, and he and his friend were taken into custody after that same friend had gotten him out on bond. His friend did have a gun too. He didn't. Bottom line was, I was able to get a restraining order finally, am strictly sober, and definitely in therapy after that. This has been going on for some time now, but tonight it was particularly weird. So, some context. I'm 25, female, and I live on the second story of my building across from a big city. We have lots of homeless people in my area, and there's a safe injection site right next to my home. I'll mention right off the bat too that I have been homeless within my lifetime as well, from age 8 to 10, and grew up in the care of an addict. I completely empathize with folks who are having a tough go at things. However, I also value my safety, and my neighbor's safety for that matter, so I'll preemptively apologize if at any point I sound frustrated at this ongoing situation. I'm mad at the situation that has plagued both the life of myself and the homeless man who is tormenting my building. So, this all started about a year ago, when my partner and I were nearly attacked by this homeless man while downstairs in our parking lot. To summarize the situation, we had just gotten home where my partner was going to drop me off, and we didn't live together at the time. We kind of do now, but only on the weekends. And as we said our goodnights, we noticed a man pacing in the visitors' parking lot who was seemingly having a rough time. We kept our distance, car doors locked and windows up, and eventually the man got the hint and he left. Just to set the scene as well a bit here, my parking lot has two sections. One is a public or guest parking area. The second is a locked gate with a smaller locked door for residents to safely park overnight. The gate requires an FOB entry, and the door has a regular building key. Both were made with metal bars, and this is important for later. So I got out of the car and proceeded to walk towards the door, key in hand. My partner started up the car, which caused the homeless man to rush back into the park gate and promptly attack the car. He hopped onto the hood, beating at the windows and trying to rip off the mirrors. I watched in horror as this terrifying situation evolved next to me, a mere 14 feet away, I would guess, but I quickly got my key into the lock and opened the door at lightning speed. The sound of my keys caught the attention of the man, and he promptly sprinted towards me. Thankfully, by this point, I had begun closing the door behind me. By the time that he got to me, I slammed the door in his face and I stepped backwards while he just screamed at me. When my partner realized that I was safely behind a locked door, he got into gear and drove away. Moments later, he called me and instructed me to get away from the door and safety upstairs. It was a good thing that he did that too, because I felt like I was just completely frozen. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding out of my chest as this homeless man screamed disgusting things at me, most of which revolved around sexually assaulting me and gesturing crudely at his groin and flicking his tongue, and I finally broke my freeze, walked away as he chanted, pretty lady, want a taste, huh?" Those words are burned into my memory now too, but I rushed upstairs and quickly closed the blinds of my windows. I heard him still yelling and chanting outside for a good few minutes after, but then I heard something really unusual, a sort of lighter clicking. The silence was deafening as the lighter clicked repeatedly. Eventually the click stopped and he began laughing. I looked outside, peering through the blinds. I realized that he was attempting to set our building's wooden fence on fire. Luckily, it had been raining, so the fence wasn't catching, but I quickly hopped on a call with the emergency services, who sent a police car and a fire truck. As soon as the cop car pulled up, the homeless man went absolutely ballistic and started screaming at the top of his lungs. They apprehended him quickly and took him away in the ambulance. Months passed with no sign of him, but one day a resident in my building reported being attacked by a man who matched his description. After that incident, we, the residents, repeatedly heard him screaming, crying, moaning, and even laughing at least 3 times a week outside of our building, generally at night. He also started trashing and damaging people's cars when they parked in the guest parking lot. Thankfully, we installed a new gate last week that closes off the guest parking behind another FOB-activated gate. But the thing is, as soon as the gate got installed, the man left us alone. It's been a really quiet week, and it's been nice. But tonight, about an hour ago, I was laying in bed scrolling on TikTok when I heard what sounded like soft sobbing. At first, I thought it was coming from TikTok, but after some scrolling, I realized that it was coming from outside. I looked outside, and there he was, sobbing and pacing around in the back alley. He suddenly switched gears, though, and started jogging while groaning loudly and continuing to cry while occasionally hitting and attacking the new fence that we installed. He's seemingly left now, but honestly, I'm terrified at this new habit. I'm really hoping that he doesn't start crying outside of my building routinely. It's terrible to listen to, and I feel really bad for the guy. And I also feel bad sharing this, but the whole situation is really freaking me out, and I just don't feel safe in my own home anymore. I think I just need to vent, but I also am wondering if you guys have any ideas of what I should do about this. So my grandparents live in a house located in a very secluded area surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbor is around maybe half a mile from their house. Whenever my grandfather has work in town for a couple of days, he calls me home to take care of my grandmother, who suffers from arthritis. Now, one night, it started raining really heavily, and there was a power cut the entire night too. It was really windy, and since the house is pretty old, you can hear a lot of creaking sounds. But at around 1, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud knocking sound at the front door. My grandmother was still sleeping, and I didn't want to wake her up. The noise had freaked me out because it was impossible for someone to be out at this time in the rain, outside of our house like that. But I thought maybe it was my grandfather, who probably had some emergency and had to come home at this time of night. As I walked to the main door to see who it was, the knocking suddenly stopped. I saw our dog standing at the corner of the room, looking at the door with his tail between his legs. He looked really scared. I figured something wasn't right, and that if someone was outside of my door, it obviously wasn't my grandfather. So I went upstairs to see who it was through the window, and what I saw was a shadow, but I'm not sure if it was actually a person's shadow or just a hallucination of my sleepy mind. Whatever the case, I didn't open the door, and in the end I just went back to bed and I fell asleep. But the creepiest part was that the next morning I saw muddy footprints on my front porch, and also a broken door handle, like it had been completely ripped off. This happened back in the 80s. My best friend and I were wandering around the neighborhood in the afternoon, and we came to a short bridge at one point that went over a small creek, and we looked over the rail, saw this kid crouched on a big flat stone at the edge of the creek, poking around in the water with a stick. He was wearing a red hoodie with the hood up, blue jeans, and white high-top sneakers. I couldn't help but notice, though, just how incredibly clean his clothes and shoes looked. Well, we thought it would be funny to drop a rock in the water and sort of splash him, seeing that it didn't seem to know that we were there yet. Then, all of a sudden, he just sort of seemed to look up at us. Didn't stand up or anything, just calmly turned his head and looked right at us. But the weirdest thing is that his face was pure white and perfectly smooth, like an egg or something. No features at all, and the fear that we felt at his gaze was instant and intense. We ran like we've never run before, about 2 blocks, and after that day, we never really talked about it again. About a year later, though, I was hanging out with some other guys riding bikes, and another friend came running up out of breath and freaked out. Started describing the exact same sort of faceless kid doing the exact same thing, but at a different spot along the river. I just kind of froze over, but everybody else was making fun of him. I looked at him and just asked, "Super clean looking?" He just went silent. I often wonder if anyone else has seen this kid or this thing, whatever it is. When I was 11, I'm now 40, I moved in with my best friend Charlotte and her family. My family and I were really not getting on, so Charlotte's mum Mercy let me live with them for a few months. I stayed in Charlotte's room, and the two of us would get up every day, make our lunches, and head off to school. We lived in the nicer part of a poor neighborhood. Mercy worked full-time, and Charlotte's dad wasn't on the scene. Charlotte's brother Dallas was 2 years older than us, and the self-proclaimed man of the house. He had a whole stack of friends whose home situations were similar to mine, so it wasn't uncommon for the house to be full of teenagers by the time Mercy got home. Dallas's girlfriend lived next door. I never met her, but I remember that there was always people coming and going from her house. It was around this time, too, that Dallas lost his front door keys, and we'd started noticing that food was going missing too, and that things would not be where we thought that we had put them. One day Charlotte and I came home from school, and we headed to our room to drop our school bags off, and we noticed that we each had an envelope on our pillows. At first, both of us thought that Dallas had decided to write us notes about how he thought that we were ugly or smelly or something, harmless big brother type teasing. My envelope had a drawing on the front that I didn't understand. I remember opening it and finding a letter inside, though. Charlotte passed me her letter, and though the handwriting was messy, the letter told her how pretty she was. We both knew that there was no way that these letters were from Dallas. That said, I didn't want to give her mine. The author of mine detailed how they were going to come into the house and, well, kill me and sexually assault me. And to ensure I understand that I realized that the strange picture on the front of my envelope was a crude drawing of a person getting, well, you can imagine. Terrified, we called Mercy and told her what had happened, and she in turn called the police. When Dallas came home from school, we took the letters to show him and explained how we found them. He came up to our room to look around and examine our beds and belongings. Dallas called all of his friends over and interrogated them in his mum's room with the door closed. Once he was satisfied that it was none of them, he showed them the letters to see if they recognized anything familiar about them. Then they went out to ask the neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything. They never found out exactly who left the envelopes, and the police said that there was really nothing that they could do. I don't think Charlotte and I slept much for a week or so after that, too. And when some of Charlotte's and Dallas's clothes showed up on the washing line at his girlfriend's house, we figured that he must have lost his keys while visiting her, and that someone there had been coming over during the day to eat our food and steal our stuff. We changed all the locks in the house, and thankfully after that, nothing else happened. But I was really scared and angry for some time. Every time people went over to her house, I wondered if it had been them, if they were the ones who snuck into Charlotte's room and delivered those foul letters to us. I was really happy when that family finally moved away. I grew up in the 90s in Minnesota. My parents divorced when I was 8, and we spent every other weekend at my dad's haunted house. This house had every type of ghost or spirit, whatever you want to call them, you could think of. A shadow man in a trench coat and a brimmed hat, another separate shadow figure that danced down the hallway, a man dressed to go fishing, a doppelganger of my father, 2 giggling little girls, and many other unseen things too. The dishwasher, radios, and lights would turn themselves on and off randomly. Loud banging would be heard on walls and doors. Door handles would jiggle and turn on their own. Feelings of being sort of touched or caressed in the shower were reported frequently. My father also had an incident where he felt someone crawl into bed with him in the middle of the night when he was the only one home. My uncle, he reported hearing 2 little girls giggling and singing in the basement one night while sleeping downstairs. Upon awakening the next morning, he discovered that there were no kids in the house that night. So, who did he hear playing in the middle of the night like that? Also, there was a salamander plague one night too. The entire yard was covered in slimy, slithering salamanders. It only ever happened once, and I'm not positive if that was paranormal, but it was definitely strange, as you can imagine. But one sunny Saturday morning, while visiting my dad, my brother and I were up early watching cartoons. I was 8 years old and my brother was 3. As we sat on the couch, we heard 3 alerting knocking sounds on the wall 5 to 6 feet behind us. Our heads sort of quickly snapped back to look at the wall where the sound was coming from, but we didn't see anything. My brother and I quickly turned to look at each other with frightened eyes, I being the older sister trying to be brave. I told him that it was nothing. As we turn our attention back to the cartoons, my little 8-year-old brain is spinning. I mean, what if that banging noise that we just heard wasn't just the pipes, as I'd been told so many times before? What if it was a ghost? I hated when the ghosts came around like that too. Why isn't my dad around whenever this happens? As these thoughts swirl in my head, we hear it again. This time, it's coming from somewhere in the kitchen off to our left. It's not as loud as the first time, and the sound is different, like someone is knocking on the kitchen counter this time instead of the wall. We quickly strain our necks to peek inside the kitchen with lightning speed to catch whoever or whatever is making that noise, but again, there's nothing there. I take a deep breath. Once again, I pretend to be brave and tell my brother it's nothing, just ignore it. My heart is thumping in my chest, mind you, and there are butterflies in my tummy as the familiar anxiety grows worse with each passing second. But I tuck myself up on the couch in a ball, not wanting my legs to dangle off the side. I suddenly no longer feel safe. Nothing is to be trusted. Again, the same sound. This time the sound is coming from the dining room. I can also tell this time that the noise is coming from the wooden dining table. I can see the entire table from where I'm sitting, and there is nothing on the table that should be making that noise. No one except me and my brother are awake, and there is no one in the dining room. But there's just no logical reason for this knocking noise that is moving around us like this, but just then, I realize the knocking sounds have been moving in a big circle around us. If this invisible thing is to move any closer to us, the next logical place for it would be in the living room where me and my brother are currently sitting. The knock would be on the coffee table sitting less than maybe a foot away. And no sooner than that thought crossed my mind, it happened again. This time, the noise came from the coffee table sitting less than a foot away from us. I instantly flip over the back of my couch in a reverse somersault-like motion and run at superhuman speed to my father's bedroom. In my panic, I completely left my little 3-year-old brother behind to fend for himself. Luckily, he wasn't too far behind, but we sneak into our father's room and quietly lay on the floor. Our dad would have been super ticked off if we woke him up early on a Saturday morning, even for a ghost. In our commotion, though, we wake up our 6-year-old sister who is sleeping on our dad's floor. Us 3 kids always slept on this floor together when we were visiting. We also used the bathroom together. That's how terrified we were of ghosts here, but we quietly whisper what just happened out in the living room to our sister, and as we're telling her this story, something catches our eye. We can see a black shadow under the small space between the bottom of the door and the plush carpet. This black shadow is slowly pacing back and forth in the hallway, just on the other side of the bedroom door. Back and forth it went, like this shadow was, I don't know, almost waiting for us. Unfortunately, I don't really remember what happened after this. somehow the rest of that memory has been lost with time, I guess, but I don't know for sure if we didn't open the door or not. All I remember is that later in the day, I was playing with my siblings, and that's it. So this happened a long time ago, but it still creeps me out. This happened back in 2017. I worked nights and was getting my workout in before I had to go to work that night. My wife and daughter are in the living room, and my wife hears someone try to walk into our apartment. Understandably panicked, she quickly gets my attention in the other room. I go to look through my peephole and immediately think that it's my little brother, but when I open the door, I realize that it was a complete stranger. He had shaggy hair, his eyes were huge, like dilated, like he was on something, and he was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. He had his hands inside his pockets on the hoodie, and it looked almost as if he was clutching something pretty tightly. My gut instinct is strong at this point, and I quickly try to shut the door. As this happens, he tries to insert his foot so that I can't. Luckily, I was quicker and was able to get the door shut and locked. I then booked it to my room and got my gun, still unsure of what this guy had in mind, but by the time that I got back, he was nowhere to be found around my apartment. I keep thinking that he just had the wrong apartment and maybe he mistook it for somebody else's, but then I remembered that he tried to stop me from shutting my door, combined with how quickly he got out of there and whatever he was clutching in his pocket like that. To this day, the thought of what could have happened, it still terrifies me, and although it does go without saying, I did end up calling in that night. My family and I are from Australia, and back in 2007, we decided to take a month-long holiday in America. We travelled from LA up the west coast and then back down through Nevada. We did this by renting a car and doing the whole vacation road trip style. But one night, we were traveling towards Lompoc and stopped in Santa Barbara for the night to sleep. We drove around a while looking for a decently priced motel that wasn't too, bring your own UV light, if you know what I mean. And my mum and dad found a place that looked okay and went inside to inquire about the price of a room for the night, while my sister and I stayed in the car and listened to music on our iPods. We were bopping along to the Frey album I had bought that day when my sister removed her headphones and said, "Look at Mum, what is she doing?" I looked up out the window and can see in the reception of the motel and see my dad talking to the manager and my mum displaying very cold and odd body language. She's usually very friendly with staff everywhere, so this was odd for her. "What's wrong with her?" I said to my sister as we kept a close eye on them. My mum was standing behind my dad with her arms crossed and looked around the place as if she was on guard for something, as if her hypervigilance senses had kicked in or something. After some time, though, my mum and dad got back into the car and they discussed what to do about staying the night. My dad stated that he wouldn't find anywhere cheaper for the night and he was hungry and ready for dinner, so we better just stay here. Plus, it was the last room available, so we would have to make a quick decision anyway. To his dismay, my mum disagreed though. "I don't like this place. I have a bad feeling," said my mum. My dad argued on, getting more and more irritated that my mum couldn't explain what she didn't like about the place until my mum finally snaps and yells over my dad saying, "We're not staying here." Fine," my dad says as he starts the car and backs out of the motel driveway. At this point, my sister and I are sort of looking at each other like, what the heck just happened? But we stay quiet as Mum seems on edge. Anyway, we end up finding a place to stay that Mum approved of and bunkered down for the night. In the morning, we're all bustling around the motel room getting ready for the day when my dad turns up the TV and there's a news story about a shooting at the motel that my mum didn't want to stay at that night. Turns out, about 15 minutes after we left, that's right, only 15 minutes, a couple walked in and booked that last room, and the man that was behind them shot them because they took the last room. We all instantly turned to look at my mum, who was standing there wide-eyed, watching in horror, and she says, "I told you I had a bad feeling about that place." She said it to my dad, who was pretending not to listen. Moral of this story is always trust your gut. Or better yet, maybe always trust your mum's gut. My family and I had a caravan in a holiday park in New South Wales. We would go there every school holidays, and there were many kids that I used to run around and play with there. I have fond memories of this place too, where I learned to ride a bike and even had my first kiss. But other memories are not so good, and now leave me with that sort of egg flip feeling in my stomach. The people that owned the caravan park had a son, and he was roughly 25 years old. I would have been around 5 or 6 at the time, I guess, but he would drive around the park and collect everybody's rubbish on a tractor, and do other odd jobs like this to help out his parents. Every once in a while, he would pull up when I was playing at the front and ask if I wanted to ride on the tractor. I, being young and naive, of course accepted and jumped on because what child doesn't want to ride on a tractor, right? This was back in the days where parents would let their children play in the streets without much supervision, and you just came back home when the streetlights came on. But one day, when he dropped me back to our van, my dad came storming out, grabbed me by my arm and yanked me off the tractor. Without saying a word to the man, he took me inside and told me to never ever hang out with him again. "I don't want you hanging around with that man again," he said without saying why. "But he's nice, he gives me lollies," I say. "Just don't, I'm telling you, don't talk to him," he replied. I couldn't understand why my dad didn't want me to talk to the nice man who only gave me tractor rides, gave me lollies and hugs, and sometimes the occasional sandwich. I remember telling the man one day, "My dad said that I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore," to which he smirked and replied, "Oh yeah, why's that?" Anyway, fast forward nearly 13 to 14 years later, my family and I are watching the news when that man's face flashes across the screen, attached to a story where he had apparently murdered 2 people and is now serving time in prison. My dad said, look at this, I knew he was bad news. There was always just something about him. Do you remember when he used to take you around on that tractor?" My blood instantly ran cold, and my stomach dropped. The most disturbing part, he killed people with pills that he would call his lollies. Please, always listen to your parents. I mean, I would be dead by now if it wasn't for them. So this is a bizarre experience that I've been confused about for some time, and I wanted to share it. And I also wondered if anyone could shed some light on what might have been going on here. So in September of 2018, I, a 23-year-old female, was visiting San Francisco and was walking through Fisherman's Wharf. It was super busy, there were a lot of people, and I was just passing the entrance to Pier 39 when a man dressed entirely in black stepped out a few feet ahead and started walking directly towards me. I didn't think much of it at first until another man appeared out of nowhere to the side of him, and both seemed about to corner me. A really weird thing was that both men were wearing latex gloves too. They looked out of place, but obviously I was like, what the heck, and turned around and walked straight off in the opposite direction. It was weird, but I didn't give it much more thought. Fast forward a week later, I'd returned to San Francisco from a trip and was once again around Pier 39 with a couple of girls that I had met out there, and at this particular moment, we had just spotted another couple of people from our group. It's difficult to explain, but at the exact moment we greeted the other guys we knew, another person appeared directly beside me, wrapped an arm around my friend and I, and said, "Hey, let's get a selfie," while snapping a picture of us on his phone. I noticed the phone was angled so that only my friend and I were in the photo, not him, which was weird. But I quickly covered my face, but they got a complete picture of my friend's face. When I turned around to look at the person, it was one of the guys who had tried to stop me a week earlier, again dressed in all black. To be honest, I was completely freaked out by this experience, and after we'd got some dinner in the area, I told my friends that we'd have to get an Uber back to the hostel rather than walking, even though it was a short distance, because I just had a really bad feeling about that encounter. I wanted to call the police, actually, but no one else seemed to understand why I was so concerned. To this day, I do wonder, did we narrowly avoid being trafficked or something? I can't think of what else would have been going on, but thankfully, in the end, nothing else really came of it. It was such an odd and weird experience that I just can't stop thinking about it, though. So I'm a logger in northern BC, Canada. I'm an avid hunter and have spent many a nights hunting alone. That being said, quite a few years ago, I was working on a broken down skidder in the dark after everyone on the logging block was gone, changing a blown hydraulic hose under the cab, when I felt like I was being just watched or something. The feeling continued to get worse too, and so I was sort of on edge and continued to work on replacing the blown hose. Every trip for tools to the service truck and back, I would sort of scan for eyes in the nearby tree line, maybe about 25 meters away with my flashlight. There was nothing. I continued to work on the pain-in-the-butt hose that you literally have to dive your head and upper body under the cab to reach, and so your legs are sort of stuck up in the air and feeling vulnerable. And the feeling of being watched gets even more intense. All the hairs on my neck are standing, and I hear a two-tone whistle from far away, almost as if it was the wind. It was so far away, but it was flat and calm that day. Also, there was about 6 inches of fresh snow on the ground, but I pushed myself out from under the skidder and looked around quietly with a flashlight for eyes in the tree line and down the road. Again, there's nothing. I had one side of the hose fitting to remove still, and it was the easier side and higher up, so I wasn't sort of, like butt up in the air trying to remove it. I put my head back under the cab and quickly began to spin the fitting loose, and the feeling of being watched was now so bad that every hair on my body was standing, and then I hear the same two-tone whistle very loudly in the tree line directly behind me. I had the hose off at the exact same time, so I whipped myself out from under the cab and turned ready to throw down with a 1/5/8 wrench in my hand, yelling, "All right, where are ya?" But there was nothing. No one there, no tracks, no eyes, no wind either. In fact, no sound whatsoever, which was really strange. The flashlight that I had was more of a small floodlight for working on repair stuff, so it didn't really light up inside the trees or anything. But the next day, it had snowed another 6 inches or so I went up and hiked the tree line with a 12 gauge and 7 3-inch slugs ready to go. But there were no tracks that I could see, no perches on the trees where snow had have been pushed off or anything, if it was a bird. Nothing. But I definitely heard someone whistle, or make a whistling sound of some sort. As I said, I'm an avid hunter, and animals just don't make that sort of noise. I don't know. The whole situation was really weird, and I don't know what to think about it. Maybe I'm just overreacting, and maybe it was an animal, one that I just haven't come across yet or something. In any case, years later, this all happened about maybe 7 kilometers down the road from the last incident. I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light, so we hiked back to the truck and we hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we're just heading back towards town again when the music started acting sort of weird and cutting in and out with static, so me being in the passenger seat, disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. Music cleared up and we continued down the road. We got up to the kilometer board on the road that my previous encounter took place, and I mentioned, "Oh, hey, that's the whistle block that we logged a couple of years back," half jokingly because I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. My friend replied, "Great, thanks for that." as I told him the story before. But we continued slowly driving down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple of spots, and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend as well. Well, we go about 1 kilometer further and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as like alien noises. So I disconnect the Bluetooth again and my friend says, "Oh, Mum's got a cord in here somewhere." So he stops and gets the cord for me. I plug the phone in and play the music again. Another kilometer down the road and the phone just goes absolutely mental. I mean, like loud alien squealing and sounds similar to that terrible dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening, and we shut the music off completely as we were driving still, making the one half of the S-turn, and then we both look up from the music deck or screen, and the headlight illuminates what I can only describe as a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerve and take the ditch a bit, still going probably, I don't know, like 30 kilometers an hour, and get the truck back up on the road. We continue coasting down the road as we're both in awe after just seeing a flash of whatever this thing was. And I finally say after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see that?" My friend cuts me off and says, "A skeleton in the middle of the road?" I say, "Yeah, like a white rib cage, and a deer skull for a face almost." He finishes. I said, "Turn around. What was that? Does someone need our help?" Not thinking that we're in the middle of nowhere, with no vehicles around, mind you, or any that we had passed from other hunters or anything. It was early season and no one bow hunts here anyways. My friend said, "I'm not turning around. Man, I feel sick, like I'm about to throw up." And he continued driving, thankfully without throwing up. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit pavement again. So, whatever this thing was, it was taller than the pickup by easily a couple of feet. I'm 6'1" and my forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It has black surrounding the white of the bones with sort of long arms half stretched to its side, and it was standing there as if to say, "Try and hit me." I watched this thing pass the passenger window and stared up at it as we wailed by it, and it was definitely 3-dimensional, tall with long arms and incredibly dark, dead-looking, sort of like, I don't know, maybe it was just my eyes, but like light was sort of sucked into it without reflecting anything. Hard to explain, but that's the best way I can put it. When we hit service again, though, my friend received a text message from his mother saying, "What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck?" I guess the new Fords send near-accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something. I'm an old-school Chevy guy, so I don't really know much about this, but the only thing that I can find online that resembles what we both saw, and I know this is pretty cringe, but is, well, a Wendigo, just without the antlers. Or just that the headlights, perhaps, didn't illuminate them or something. So I live with my dog and my roommate in a 1-story duplex. I've got a fenced-in yard, and the private spot where my car parked is accessible via an alleyway with a bunch of massive signs saying no parking, no trespassing, private property, and whatnot. So I was sitting in my bedroom playing games, and it was around 12 or 1 in the morning, and my dog, sitting on the couch in the living room, started barking at something outside. Every now and then, she does this because there's a squirrel or a bush moved or something. So I get up to go and shush her, and I open the blinds on the window to say, "See, there's nothing outside." But actually, there is something outside. Through the fence, I can see the headlights of a car idling out in the front of my house, and lights sort of bobbing around outside, and what appears to be people walking around in front of my yard by my car with flashlights looking around. In the middle of the night, mind you. Full disclosure, I was also kind of stoned, and I'm not sure if it's a reverse effect because my sober self is an anxiety-ridden creature living under a blanket who was too scared to send an email to my manager. but my high self is Fred from Scooby-Doo pretty much, as in, come on gang, let's solve the mystery. So I decide that I'll just go out there and investigate. I let my dog out with my pajama-wearing, unarmed, braless self out there. My yard is fenced, so my dog cannot go to them without me opening the gate, but she does keep barking, and step outside and I go to the gate. I can now see it's a well-dressed woman and a man, in a sort of nicer, newer model car. They're walking around the front yard with flashlights, and I go, "Hey, this is private property. Can you please leave?" The woman seems kind of startled and says, "Oh, sorry, our car broke down." The man gets in the car and she walks around, goes back in the car. They talk for a while. I'm really not sure what else to do at this point, so I just kind of stand there watching for what felt like ages, but maybe it was only a minute or two. I don't know how long it actually was, but they seem to be deciding what to do, and he starts the car back up. They pull out, proceed to drive around, pull into the public street and park behind my neighbor's car instead. I decide to sit outside from my porch and kind of watch them, to make sure that they didn't get out and start investigating the neighbor's car instead. And they never popped the hood of their car, mind you, or got out, which seemed to run fine when they drove off, by the way. I never saw them come back either. A couple of notes here too is that there are loads of spots you can park in and around my neighborhood that would not be on clearly private property, with better lighting, and you do not need to be near other cars there too. But to get to where my car is parked, you've got to drive down an alleyway and look for a spot, like my friends have trouble finding it. The car was like a newer model sports car, mind you. Not saying that those can't ever break down, but I guess that I'd be less suspect if they just rolled up in like a Geo Metro, Mini Cooper, or an old Subaru hatchback or something, and were like, "Oh man, my terrible car broke down." When I sobered up the next day, though, I was like, I either just politely told some car thieves to stop attempting robbery on me, and they did, or I made someone's terrible night even worse. I mean, they didn't seem to be dressed for stealing a car, more like a party or a date night. The woman was in heels, for instance, and I really don't know much about cars, so maybe they really did just break down and the spot next to my car was the closest they could find or something. But then I maybe spooked them even more by taking neighborhood watch a little too far, and I guess if I parked in a neighborhood and a half-naked woman and her possibly big scary dog came outside to stare at me in the middle of the night, I'd probably get out of there too. But I don't know, something about the whole situation just didn't sit well with me. I mean, why did they have torches out like that, and what were they looking for? It just seems really strange and doesn't seem to match up with anything that I can come up with. So I'm having some very strange things happening to me lately that are really starting to legitimately scare me now. I live on a farm in the middle of SC USA, and I'm a cigarette smoker, so I go outside at random times at night, and I usually am okay with it, just usual sounds, but every once in a while I'll hear something like strange noises, but just sort of brush it off. But lately, within the past month, it's gotten a heck of a lot worse. For instance, I'll be sitting on the porch and I can hear voices of people talking, which sound very close, which is obviously unnerving to say the least. But last night, it was way worse. The voices started sounding like people I know, which they don't live anywhere near me. They live in other parts of the country or in different countries altogether. And well, the other night it sounded like someone was approaching me from my right, and it kept getting closer until I stood up and I pulled my pocket knife out and went to the stairs on the porch, and as I did that, whatever it was ran. It sounded like 2 feet running off into the woods. Last night, though, it got super close, whatever it was, like at the end of the porch, and I also heard breathing. It was terrifying, so I just instantly went inside. I got curious at this point, though, and video chatted my girlfriend. I went back out and we were listening together, and I swear that I heard something that I've never heard around here at all. I heard a little kid singing, which eventually turned into an adult laughing, and then like 2 minutes of wailing that moved slowly through the woods, just out of sight, so I couldn't see who it was. She didn't hear it, which obviously she's on a video chat, so maybe she just didn't hear it, or I don't know, maybe I'm going mad or something. I don't know if I'm being messed with by people or something more serious, or if it's just my own mental health. If anyone has any ideas of what this is, then please let me know, because I'm almost at the point of just getting in my car and leaving and never coming back. Also, I forgot to add too that there's a cemetery at the end of our yard, which I believe has 2 children and 2 adults, judging by the size of the tombstones. Whoever they are, those tombstones are really old, and I don't know if that means anything, or if, like I said, perhaps I'm just losing it. So I, a 25-year-old female, have always remembered these experiences from my childhood as the most confusing and scary times growing up. My brother is 3 years younger than me, and this all started happening when he was around 4 or 5. We can call my brother B, and B as a child had health problems and needed a lot of different surgeries that he was in and out of hospital often with. The way my mum will retell this is that this all started with my brother having a horrendous night terrors, so bad that he would sit upright in bed with a blood-curdling scream, thrashing his arms and legs around. When B would wake up, he would have no recollection of his dream, but as time went on, B started to talk to someone at night, and his toy fire trucks would start to light up with the siren going off too. My mum would wake up in the morning and the clocks would all be set to 2:15 a.m., which was really weird. In our house too, we had a storage room under the stairs. The storage room was right next to B and I's playroom. B would always say that John and his mum lived in that storage room, and he would go and knock on the door and say, "Hi, John's mum, can John come and play with me and my sister?" I never really thought too much of it, being a child, and my parents telling B that he had an imaginary friend. B would want us to set up an extra plate for John at the dinner table, buckle him into the car, etc., and would freak out completely if my parents didn't comply. We had weird things going on in the house though too. My baby dolls would go off non-stop to the point that my mum took the batteries out and shoved the dolls in the bottom of the toy box, and one in specific still went off, even without batteries, which I didn't even know how that's possible. But we also had this motion sensor, a Big Bird plushie, that constantly went off when nobody was in the room, and the toy would be turned off all the time too. This went on for at least a year, I think, and my mum has said that the breaking point was my brother crying in the kitchen, saying him and John apparently got into a fight, with B saying, "I told John that we can't be friends anymore because I have bones and he doesn't." That same night too, I woke up to a woman calling my name and standing at the side of my bed. When I rolled over and opened my eyes, she immediately asked me, "Where's John?" I didn't reply, and she seemed to get upset and asked again, "Where's John?" I again didn't reply and was so scared that I just rolled over and closed my eyes, hoping that it would go away. When I rolled back over, she was gone. I remember I booked it into my parents' room. My mum let me sleep in their bed for the night, but the next night, I remember my mum talking to a priest and another strange man. My mum has since told me that the priest was there to bless the house, and the other man was a medium to help John and his mum cross over. The medium was able to tell my mum that John and his mum had passed away in a house fire, which has always messed with me because the main toy that went off was B's fire truck, remember? I mean, it was set off almost every night. Was John trying to tell us something? But apparently he had attached himself to B the last time he had surgery. After the blessing and the encounter with the medium, John and his mum were never encountered again, not even by my brother. I really don't know what to make of most of it, but all I can say is that if John and his mum were not just imaginary, then I do hope that they found their way to the light. So basically, I was raised very Christian, strict Christian, and have never really believed in ghosts, but I do believe in demonic entities or something that is definitely evil. Now that I'm older, I'm still on the fence about believing in ghosts, as in things that are spirits of dead people roaming about that have no ill intent. Even with this belief, though, I still loved a good horror movie, and admitted that a lot of other people's encounters were hard to explain if the paranormal entity in question seemed harmless. It's important to remember this part too, because it's a part of the story. So when I was in high school, I was best friends with a girl who was a little bit weird, and she was the definition of pretty much a pick-me girl. Her name was Amanda, and I would stay at Amanda's house basically every weekend, and after we graduated I was there pretty much 24/7. Never once did I feel weird in her house or anything, but one day, Amanda calls me basically in tears, insisting that someone has broken into her house, and that she hears footsteps and banging, and I told her that I would come over and check it out because I lived literally like 2 minutes down the road from her. I show up and the doors are all locked. I, being an idiot, jokingly start kicking on the doors, yelling out, calling for any serial killers to come out. It made her laugh and feel better, and to be honest, it kind of made me feel better too. Weeks passed though, and we forgot about the situation, and we just go on with our lives. When suddenly, Amanda is telling me how her dad finally fixed the upstairs bathroom shower where her bedroom is, and that every time that she uses the shower, she feels like she's being watched and the lights flicker and it really creeps her out. I play it off as her just being spooked or trying to creep me out or something. But then another time, her mum is talking to me and tells me that she got spooked because the door to that bathroom got stuck, and she said that it felt like someone was holding it shut. Again, I play it off as just something that can be scientifically explained. Their house was split level, and her parents basically had the entire downstairs, and their kids had the upper level. But there were 2 rooms that suddenly started bothering me, and it was the upper living room and the laundry room downstairs. Every time that I'd go upstairs, I would swear that I saw a black figure in the corner of my eye, and every time that I would go into the laundry room, it was eerily dark, even with the lights on, and freezing cold, even in the middle of summer. It was weird, but in the end I just sort of avoided those areas, and I had read something about how the sound vibrations can cause people to think that they see something that's not really there, or something along those lines. Point is that it made me feel better, and the laundry room I figured was just because it had concrete flooring, so it was cooler. But one night I had come over late after work, and Amanda went downstairs to take a shower. I had laid down on her bed with her door open and my back turned, and I just got this awful feeling of being watched all of a sudden. You know how sometimes you can almost hear when someone is sneaking up on you? Well, I had that feeling. I immediately sat up and looked at the doorway, convinced that it was her brother messing with me or the dog had come upstairs or something, but when I did, there was nothing there. But I just could not shake that feeling though. It felt like someone was literally walking in through the doorway and staring holes into me, and at any second, something scary was about to happen. I sat there for probably 2 minutes just staring, debating if I should book it, pray, or scream. It felt like forever, but I finally heard Amanda coming out of the bathroom, and immediately that feeling just faded. I told Amanda straight away about this, and when she hears it, she kind of brushes it off and says that it's her grandpa's ghost and he likes to mess with people in the house apparently. I remind her of all the horrible things that had been happening lately, and she tells me that her mum had bought some sage or something and was going to sage the house to get rid of it, but had a dream where her dad came to her and said that it was him just playing and decided that she wouldn't sage it after all. I'm obviously pretty creeped out at this point, but decided that it's too late for me to drive home and just decide to sleep in bed with her. But that night, I have absolutely the worst nightmares I've ever had. Like being chased in the dark, weird voices saying stuff that I don't understand, something wanting to kill me type nightmare. I wake up, tell myself that I'm just freaking out, but from that day on, I just kept getting them and they got worse too. It wouldn't be every night, but it was often enough to bother me. One night I was sleeping at my boyfriend's house and had a sleep paralysis type nightmare too, where something opened his bedroom door and crawled in on the ceiling. Picture Alien but with a human head and long talons. I woke up halfway through unable to move and kept trying to call out for my boyfriend, but instead fell back asleep and the dream picked up right where it left off. I text Amanda's mum and she reaffirms that there's nothing evil in her house. It's her dad and he was just playing pranks on all of them. A few more weeks passed though and I stopped going to Amanda's house because 1, well, the demons, and 2, Amanda starts acting really shady too. She's doing things that I don't like, such as sleeping over at my ex's house, sending me Snapchats of them together, constantly talking of him and just being a jerk. She also somehow figures out my new boyfriend's Twitch account and is constantly watching him stream, trying to get him to talk to her, asking for his Snapchat, number, Insta, etc. And at that point, I just sort of lose my mind about it and I cut all ties from her. And, coincidentally, or maybe not, I don't know, but the nightmares instantly stop. I don't know what to think about that, but I would like to know if I wasn't just having some kind of psychotic snap, and it was at a bad point in my life for sure, but the fact that her family knew about it and thought that it was a dead relative, just, I don't know, it makes my skin crawl.